There are places in your mind that you've never visited, not because they don't exist, but because you weren't meant to find them. You see, your mind is not just thought. It's not just memory. It's a structure, an intricate, hidden house, built from every moment you've ever lived. And like any house, some rooms are open. You walk through them every day, without even thinking. But there are other rooms you pass by without noticing, rooms behind walls you never touch, rooms behind doors you never knew were there. Why? Because your mind is careful with you. It shows you only what you need, only what you can hold. But tonight, in the stillness, when the noise of the world is gone, you'll begin to hear the doors. They creak softly, just enough for you to wonder. And when you follow, when you step quietly into those forgotten places, you will find what your brain has kept hidden. 100 rooms. Each one a secret. Each one a part of you. And there is one room, a room I must warn you about. The room where you lied to yourself. That room exists, not in the world, but inside you. And one day, you will reach it. Maybe tonight, maybe not. But when you do, everything will feel different. Because once you see that room, once you step inside, you won't ever look at your own mind the same way again. So stay. Walk with me. Through these rooms. Through these whispers. Not to be afraid, but to remember what you were never told. And as you drift deeper, as sleep begins to soften the edges, you will find you've always been here. Waiting. There's something strange about the way we remember people. You might think that the faces you've seen and forgotten are gone, lost forever, but your mind doesn't quite work like that. This is the room of forgotten faces, a place in your mind where fragments of strangers are quietly stored. You've passed them in hallways, seen them on trains, stood beside them in lines, and then you moved on. But your brain? It didn't. Your mind is constantly recording. It has to, because from an evolutionary perspective, faces are important. We're wired to notice them, even when we don't need them. Studies in neuroscience show that your fusiform face area, a part of the brain dedicated solely to facial recognition, activates with every face you see, familiar or not. But your conscious mind can't hold all of them. So what happens? It forgets, on purpose. It filters out what's unnecessary. You only recall those faces tied to emotion, relevance, or repetition. The rest? They're pushed here. This room. Have you ever met someone and felt like you've seen them before, even when you know you haven't? That's this room at work. It's not magic. It's your mind pulling from old, unused files, echoes of faces that meant nothing, but still left a trace. But there's more. This room isn't just about others, it's about you. Your face lives in other people's rooms too. People you've crossed paths with, even just for a second. You might be a shadow in someone else's memory right now, forgotten, but present. And this brings a strange kind of connection. Because while we live our lives thinking of ourselves at the center, rooms like this remind us we are part of the background in someone else's world. And even if those faces are blurred, even if they no longer have names, they shape tiny moments. A glance, a smile, a feeling you didn't even realize you had. They're not gone. They're just filed away, out of reach, but never erased. This room is not meant to be opened often. But tonight, you've stepped inside, not to remember them all, but to understand that the mind forgets only what it must. The room where time breaks. Time is supposed to be steady, predictable. The seconds tick, the minutes pass, the hours move forward. But does it always feel that way? This is the room where time breaks, and it's built from every moment when time didn't behave. You've been here, even if you didn't know it. Remember when a joyful day passed in what felt like minutes? Or when you waited for something, and the minutes seemed to stretch endlessly? That wasn't the world changing. That was your mind bending time. Psychologically, this is called temporal perception. It's not just about clocks or schedules. It's about how you feel. When you're anxious, stressed, or bored, time feels slow. When you're excited or focused, it speeds up. Your brain is not a stopwatch, it's a storyteller, interpreting each moment based on emotion. In this room, you begin to see that time isn't one straight line. It folds in on itself. Here are the hours that dragged on while you waited for news. Here are the days that blurred together when nothing seemed to change. Here are the seconds that stretched into something almost unbearable. But also, here are the flashes of joy, so quick they left you breathless. The reason your mind holds these moments differently is survival. The brain pays more attention to intensity than duration. A traumatic event might last seconds but stay with you forever. A peaceful day might last hours but slip away unnoticed. In this room, your mind keeps these broken pieces. It tries to make sense of what can't be measured by a clock. And the strange thing? This isn't a flaw. It's how we make meaning. Time breaks because life isn't meant to be even. And when you leave this room, you understand that how you lived each moment matters more than how long it lasted. The room of almost dreams. There's a place in your mind that exists between waking and sleeping. You've felt it before, but it's not easy to explain. This is the room of almost dreams, where your thoughts start to drift, but haven't yet let go of reality. You know this place. You've been here at the edge of sleep, when your body begins to relax, but your mind is still just aware enough to notice strange things happening. Maybe you've seen flashes of images, faces, colors, places that don't make sense. Maybe you've heard a voice, just for a second, only to realize there was no one there. This is called the hypnagogic state, a transition between wakefulness and dreaming. It's your brain switching modes. In this state, logic fades. Control softens. Your brain starts blending memory, imagination, and sensation. Thoughts move freely, unshaped by reality. But they don't quite become dreams. They almost do. Your mind uses this space for many things. It helps process the day, taking pieces of conversations, moments, emotions, and turning them over softly, seeing what sticks. It also lets go, loosening the grip on focused thought, allowing creativity and emotion to rise. In this room, nothing is solid. You aren't solving problems or making plans. You're just drifting. And that's the point. This state is essential. It helps prepare you for deeper sleep, for real dreams, for rest. But sometimes, what you experience here stays with you. Have you ever had a dream you couldn't quite remember, but the feeling lingered? That was this room, leaving behind traces of what might have been. Almost dreams are powerful because they remind us that the mind is not always about clarity. Sometimes, it's about the space in between, the soft places where ideas form without structure, where thoughts are free to be almost anything. And as you rest in this room, you don't need to understand. You don't need to hold on. You can simply let go and drift with the thoughts that don't quite stay. The room of silent fears. Not all fears are loud. Some fears never speak. They don't shout or demand attention. They don't chase you in nightmares or make your heart race. Instead, they sit quietly, just beneath the surface. This is the room of silent fears. It's the place where your most subtle, yet powerful fears are stored. These fears don't feel like fear. They feel like hesitation, like doubt, like the small voice that tells you not to try. You might not even recognize them, but they're there, guiding decisions, shaping paths. Fear of being judged, fear of being seen too clearly, fear of being alone, or worse, fear of being truly known. Psychologists refer to these as core fears, deep emotional beliefs that are often formed early in life. They come from experiences, being rejected, misunderstood, abandoned. Over time, they become silent rules your mind follows. Don't speak up, what if you're wrong? Don't reach out, what if they don't care? Don't change, what if you fail? These fears protect you. That's why your brain keeps them here. They keep you safe, from pain, from risk, from uncertainty. But they also keep you small. In this room, they don't need to speak, because you already listen. You avoid, without knowing why. You settle, without asking for more. You hold back, even when you want to move forward. These are not the fears you fight in daylight. They are the ones you live with. But as you stand here now, something shifts. You see them, not as enemies, but as old friends who stayed too long. You can't erase them, but you don't have to obey them. This room reminds you that fear doesn't have to disappear to lose its power. You only need to notice it, to name it, to understand it's just a part of you, not the whole. And in this quiet, as the fears remain silent, you feel something else. You feel choice. And with that, you leave the room where words were lost. Every mind holds silence, but not all silence is peaceful. This is the room where words were lost, a quiet space, where the unsaid gathers. These are not the words you forgot. These are the words you chose not to say. At the time, it seemed easier not to speak, easier not to reveal, easier not to risk being heard. And so they stayed inside. Unspoken thoughts, felt, but never shared. Here are the truths you held back, the emotions you swallowed, the questions you never asked, the answers you never gave. You might think they're gone, that once unspoken, they vanished. But the mind doesn't work that way. Psychologically, what we suppress doesn't disappear. It lingers in memories, in patterns, in the way we relate to others. This room is where your mind keeps those echoes. And they matter because those lost words still shaped you. Every time you didn't say how you felt, you moved a little further from what you needed. Every time you avoided the truth, you made your path harder to walk. But you did it for a reason. Fear, protection, uncertainty. We all learn, in different ways, that some things are better left unsaid. But silence, repeated too often, becomes its own language. In this room, you don't need to regret what you didn't say. You only need to see it, to understand that the unsaid is not weightless. It lives here, not to punish, but to remind. You might never speak those words, and that's okay. But now, you know they existed, and in knowing, there is a kind of peace. You leave this room with a quieter mind, not empty, but aware. The room of imagined lives. There are many versions of you, not in reality, but in thought. This is the room of imagined lives. Here live all the possibilities your mind has considered, all the paths you could have taken, but didn't. What if you'd made a different choice? What if you'd taken that chance? Or walked away when you stayed? These are not regrets. They're reflections. Part of how the mind explores meaning. Every decision you make closes one door and opens another, but your brain still holds the memory of the door not taken. This is called counterfactual thinking, the human tendency to imagine alternate outcomes. We do it naturally because we need to understand. We need to feel in control, even over what never happened. In this room, you see those lives. You as the traveler. You as the artist. You in love with someone you never met. You as someone who never became who you are now. These lives aren't fantasies. They're reflections of your values, your hopes, your doubts. They show you what matters by showing you what you wonder about. And while they can feel distant, they're still part of you, not to live, but to understand. This room isn't here to make you wish for something else. It's here to remind you that choice has meaning, that every step you took shaped the world you live in. And though you can't walk every path, you can respect the ones you didn't. You leave this room not with longing, but with clarity, knowing that possibility is endless. But life is made from the choices we hold. The room of unlived moments. Not everything we experience happens. Some moments never come. This is the room of unlived moments. These are the things you almost did, the opportunities that passed, the conversations that never began, the days you imagined but didn't reach. It's easy to think these moments are nothing, that what didn't happen has no weight. But the mind remembers them differently. Psychologists speak of anticipation, how our brains prepare for events, even those that never arrive. You planned, you hoped, you expected, and when it didn't happen, the space remained. This room holds that space. The trip you never took, the person you never called, the chance you didn't take. These moments live here, not as failures, but as echoes of your desires. They show you what you cared about, even if you never acted. And in some ways, they shape you as much as what you did live. Because absence is a kind of presence. What we miss teaches us about what we seek. In this room, there's no judgment, only recognition. That life is not just made of what we do, but also of what we don't. And that sometimes, the things that didn't happen still matter. You leave this room thoughtful, but not burdened, because not every moment needs to be lived to leave its mark. The room where emotions sleep. You felt things you couldn't hold on to. This is the room where emotions sleep. Here lie the feelings that came and went before you understood them. Not suppressed, not ignored, just quiet. There are times when life moves too fast. When you're too busy to process, too focused to feel. But emotions don't disappear. They wait. In this room, here is the joy you didn't notice, because you were already thinking about the next thing. Here is the sadness that faded, because you didn't have time to cry. Here is the anger you swallowed, because you needed to stay calm. Your brain protects you. When emotions threaten to overwhelm, it sets them aside. Not forever, just until there's space. And in this room, that space is still waiting. Neurologically, emotions are energy. They're signals, guiding, warning, reminding. But when they're too much, your mind gives you distance. This room is that distance. It's a pause, a place where unprocessed feelings rest. Not lost, just asleep. And as you walk through, you start to feel them again. Not strongly, not painfully, just enough. Enough to know they're part of you. Enough to know they mattered. And maybe now, you're ready to feel them fully. Or maybe not. Either way, you leave this room knowing that what we feel doesn't define us, but it does shape us. And it's okay to take time. The room of unfinished thoughts. This room is one you've visited more times than you know, though never by choice. The room of unfinished thoughts is where your mind stores all those ideas, questions, and realizations that never quite made it to completion. You've had them while walking, while drifting off to sleep, while distracted by the noise of the world. Those moments when something important was just about to form in your mind, and then it slipped away. We often underestimate how many thoughts we begin without finishing. Psychologists have long understood that the mind is an active, ongoing process, not a perfectly ordered stream, but a flow constantly interrupted, reshaped, and forgotten. The brain filters what it thinks matters most and lets the rest go. But that doesn't mean those unfinished thoughts vanish. They remain here, in this room, as fragments, part ideas, part feelings, part potential. Sometimes you can almost recall them, a sense of something you were just about to realize, but can't quite reach again. It's not that you're forgetful. It's that your mind is constantly prioritizing. And in doing so, it leaves behind the incomplete. Some of these thoughts were never needed, but some, if you had held them a little longer, might have changed something about how you saw a person, the situation, even yourself. This room reminds you that clarity doesn't always come when we want it, that sometimes the mind needs time to circle back, to pick up what was left behind. You walk through, not trying to finish every thought, but simply aware that thinking is not always linear. And that's okay. Some answers arrive long after the question has been forgotten. The room where you waited. Waiting is something we all know. But how often do we think about what waiting really means? The room where you waited is a space that holds every moment you've spent in anticipation, in uncertainty, in that quiet space between wanting and receiving. It's easy to see waiting as empty, as something we endure to get to the next part. But psychologically, waiting is filled with emotion, anxiety, fear, boredom. All these live in the experience of waiting. In this room, your mind has stored those hours spent looking out windows, checking your phone, counting the days until something changed. And it's not just about time passing. It's about the way you felt not knowing what would come. This room holds the discomfort of not being in control, of having to trust that something, or someone, or even life itself, would eventually give you what you needed. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, but the waiting shaped you either way. Researchers in cognitive psychology have shown that the mind often remembers the anticipation of an event as strongly as the event itself. This room proves that, because you can feel, even now, the weight of all those times you waited, for news, for love, for answers, for something better. You didn't just sit still. You imagined. You prepared. You wondered. And in doing so, you lived in a world of possibility, even if just for a moment. Waiting is not passive. It's full of movement inside you. As you leave this room, you realize that waiting wasn't wasted. It was a kind of experience on its own, one that tested your patience, revealed your hopes, and showed you how much you cared about what came next. The room of echoes. Some thoughts don't fade when they end. They echo. This is the room of echoes, where your mind holds on to the things that keep repeating long after they've passed. These are not just memories. They're the moments you replay again and again, wondering if you missed something, wondering if you could change them somehow by thinking about them one more time. We all do this. It's called rumination, and it's one of the brain's ways of trying to resolve what it can't accept. The conversation that didn't go the way you wanted. The mistake you can't forget. The decision you keep questioning. This room isn't about the events themselves. It's about the need to understand them fully, even if that's not possible. The mind doesn't like loose ends. It seeks closure, and when it doesn't find it, it repeats. That's what you hear in this room. The echoes of moments that won't quite settle. And while it can feel like a burden, there's a reason this room exists. It's a place where your mind is trying to protect you, to make sure you learn, to make sure you don't forget what matters. But there's a point where the echoes no longer teach. They just fill the space. As you walk through, you begin to realize that not every moment can be resolved. Some things just happened. And the echoes? They'll fade when you stop needing answers that aren't there. You leave this room with less noise, not because you silence the echoes, but because you no longer need to listen as closely. The room of dreams you never had. This is a strange room. The room of dreams you never had. It's not filled with your past dreams, the ones you remember, or even the ones you forgot. This room is different. It holds the dreams you never had the chance to imagine. These are the hopes you never knew you could have. The visions of yourself that were never formed because life took you in another direction too soon. Sometimes, we grow up too fast, or circumstances limit our view of what's possible. Psychologists call this latent potential, the parts of us that could have grown under different conditions. In this room, you see hints of lives you might have dreamed of, if only the right moment had come. Maybe it's a passion you never discovered, a skill you never developed, A version of yourself that never had the chance to exist because no one showed you it was possible. These aren't regrets. They're simply reminders that our dreams are shaped by what we're exposed to, by what we believe we can reach. And sometimes, we never saw enough to know what else we could have wanted. Walking through this room, you don't feel loss. You feel curiosity. Because even now, there's time to explore new dreams, to find parts of yourself that haven't yet been imagined. This room doesn't close the door on what could have been. It opens the door to what still might be. The room where guilt whispers. Guilt is not always loud. It doesn't always come in sharp moments or overwhelming waves. Sometimes, guilt whispers. This is the room where guilt whispers, where your mind keeps the quiet guilt, the kind you carry without even realizing. It's not about big mistakes. It's about the small things, the times you let someone down, but never said anything. The promises you broke, even if they seemed small. The ways you didn't live up to who you wanted to be. These moments aren't at the front of your mind, but they weigh on you all the same. Guilt serves a purpose. It's the mind's way of keeping you connected to others, of reminding you what matters. But when guilt is silent, it becomes harder to face. This room exists because your mind needed a place to hold what you weren't ready to confront. The psychologist Carl Jung spoke of the shadow self, the parts of us we hide, even from ourselves. This room is part of that shadow, but it's not here to shame you. It's here to offer a chance at honesty, to acknowledge that no one lives perfectly, that we all fall short in ways we wish we didn't. As you stand here, the whispers don't accuse you. They ask you to understand. When faced, becomes lighter. It stops controlling you from behind the scenes. And in this room, you can see it clearly, not as something to fear, but as something to accept. You leave knowing that guilt can teach, but only if you're willing to listen, and then let go. The room of old smells and forgotten sounds. Memory is strange. It doesn't just live in thoughts or images. It lives in sensations. This is the room of old smells and forgotten sounds, where your mind stores the sensory details of moments long past. You may not consciously recall them, but they're still there. The scent of a room you lived in as a child. The sound of footsteps in a hallway you haven't walked in years. These fragments remain, tucked away, because your brain knows that the senses are powerful anchors to memory. Neuroscience calls this sensory memory, and it's one of the oldest forms of recall we have. A single smell can bring back an entire day. A sound can evoke a feeling you thought was lost. In this room, you find that you've never really forgotten. These memories have simply changed form. They no longer speak in words or stories. They speak in sensations, in flashes that come and go before you can fully grasp them. And yet, they still affect you. Sometimes, you feel a sudden emotion without knowing why. A mix of nostalgia, sadness, comfort. That's this room, reminding you of what shaped you, even in silence. This is where the familiar lives, the past you didn't hold on to, but which still holds on to you in subtle ways. And while you can't name every scent or sound, they continue to color your world. Quietly, you leave this room reminded that memory is not just something you think. It's something you feel, through every sense. The room where you disappeared. There are moments in life when you were there, but you didn't feel like yourself. This is the room where you disappeared, a place where your mind keeps the times when you felt invisible, even to yourself. It's not that you vanished physically. It's that something inside you faded. Maybe you were overwhelmed. Maybe you were trying to fit in. Maybe you were simply tired of being seen in ways that didn't feel true. Psychologists describe this as self-alienation. When your inner self doesn't match the role you're playing. You go through the motions. You smile when expected. But inside, you feel distant. This room holds those days, those moments, those feelings. the times you gave up part of yourself just to get through. And yet, this room is not empty, because even in disappearing, you were still present. You survived. You adapted. You found a way to exist when being fully yourself didn't feel safe. This room isn't here to remind you of loss. It's here to remind you of resilience. Sometimes, disappearing was necessary. Sometimes, you needed to step back, to retreat into yourself, to avoid breaking. But now, you can see those moments clearly. You can choose when to return. You leave this room knowing that disappearing doesn't mean you're gone. It means you're waiting for the right time to be fully seen again. The room of unasked questions. There are questions you never asked, and they've followed you ever since. This is the room of unasked questions, where your mind stores the things you wondered, but never voiced. Maybe you feared the answer. Maybe you thought it wasn't the right time. Maybe you didn't know how to put the question into words. But they remain, circling quietly in your thoughts. The truth is, we all carry questions that shape us, not just in seeking answers, but in their presence alone. Some questions are about others. Did they care? Why did they leave? What did they really feel? Some are about yourself. Could I have done more? What if I had tried? What am I missing? These questions aren't here to torment you. They're here because curiosity is how we grow. But life doesn't always give us the space to ask. And sometimes, not asking feels safer than knowing. In this room, there's no pressure to find every answer, only the space to acknowledge that wondering is part of who you are. Some questions will remain open, and that's okay, because not every question needs an answer to have meaning. Some simply remind you of what matters most. The room where you lied to yourself. Everyone lies, not just to others, but to themselves. This is the room where you lied to yourself, perhaps the hardest room to face. It holds the times you told yourself things you needed to believe, even if they weren't true. I'm fine. This doesn't matter. I don't care. We say these things because the truth feels too heavy, because admitting the truth would force change, or pain, or action we're not ready for. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the tension between what we know deep down and what we choose to accept. Your mind, trying to protect you, builds these small falsehoods. They're not malicious. They're coping tools, but they come at a cost. This room is filled with moments when you turned away from your own reality, when you stayed in situations you knew weren't right, when you denied feelings that were too strong to face, when you convinced yourself that less was enough, because more seemed impossible. Yet as hard as it is to stand in this room, there's something powerful here. You realize that lying to yourself wasn't weakness, it was survival. It was your mind's way of giving you time, giving you space until you were ready to face what you avoided. And now, maybe you are ready to look honestly at yourself, to see the gap between who you are and who you told yourself to be. But not with shame, with understanding. Self-deception is human. What matters is what you do when you finally see the truth. You leave this room not broken, but aware, knowing that honesty, even with yourself, is a process. And every time you face it, you become a little more free. The room of shared silences. There's a silence that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being with others, so saying nothing. This is the room of shared silences, where your mind keeps the moments you shared with someone, not through words, but through presence. Silence is often seen as empty, but it's not. It can be full of meaning, of emotion, of things too deep for speech. Think of the times you sat with someone, saying nothing, but feeling everything. The comfort of not having to explain. The tension of something left unsaid. The quiet connection that needed no sound. Psychologically, we are wired for communication, but not all communication is verbal. Body language, energy, attention, these all speak loudly in silence. This room holds those moments. Some were peaceful, sitting beside someone you trust, not needing to fill the air. Some were difficult, avoiding the conversation you feared, hiding behind quiet because words felt dangerous. But all of them mattered, because in those shared silences, you learned something about yourself, about others, about the spaces between people. This room reminds you that silence is not the absence of connection. It's another form of it, sometimes more honest, more raw than anything words could offer. You leave this room remembering that not all silences need to be broken. Some are meant to be held. The room where you were a stranger. There are times when you've looked at yourself and not recognized who you were. This is the room where you were a stranger, where your mind keeps the moments when your own actions, thoughts, or feelings didn't seem like your own. It's unsettling, isn't it? To do something, say something, and later wonder, was that really me? This happens more than we admit. We act out of stress, fear, anger, or confusion, and for a moment, we become unfamiliar to ourselves. Psychologists speak of dissociation, a mental detachment from reality or from the self. It's not always extreme. Sometimes it's as simple as feeling out of place in your own life, your own skin. This room is filled with those times. When you went along with something you didn't believe in, when you reacted in ways that surprised you, when you stood in a mirror and didn't feel at home in your reflection. These moments don't mean you're broken. They mean you're complex. We all have parts of ourselves we don't fully understand. Shadows, thoughts, dust, and sometimes those parts take over. But being a stranger to yourself is not permanent. It's a signal, a call to explore, to reconnect. You leave this room not in fear, but with curiosity, knowing that even when you feel lost inside yourself, you can always find your way back. The room of lost colors. There was a time when the world felt brighter, not just in mood, but literally in color, in vibrancy, in how everything appeared to you. And then slowly, or maybe suddenly, something changed. This is the room of lost colors, where your mind stores the moments when life seemed to fade in intensity, when joy dulled and things that once excited you became muted. This isn't about literal sight, but about how the brain processes emotion and meaning. Psychologists refer to it as emotional blunting, a state where experiences no longer spark the same feelings they once did. You've been here during periods of stress, sadness, days when everything felt flat. Not terrible, not unbearable, but simply felt. In this room, the memories aren't sharp or vivid. They're gray around the edges. Moments that should have mattered, but didn't. Places you went through without really being there. This isn't something you chose. It's something your mind did to protect you. When emotions become overwhelming, the brain sometimes reduces intensity to help you cope. But in doing so, it can take away the colors too. You may have thought you didn't care anymore, but it wasn't about care, it was about capacity. You can't always feel everything fully, all the time. This room reminds you that even when life dims, it's not permanent. Color can return. It just takes time, and space, and the right moment to feel safe again. As you leave this room, you notice the slightest shift, the idea that the world, even if faded, still holds color. Waiting, the room of invisible choices. You often think about the choices you've made, the big ones, the ones you planned, struggled with, decided consciously. But there's another kind of choice, one you didn't notice at all. This is the room of invisible choices, where your mind keeps the decisions made quietly, instinctively, beneath awareness. Every day, your brain makes thousands of small decisions. Who to trust, what to avoid, how much of yourself to show. These choices happen in milliseconds, shaped by experience, fear, desire, You didn't sit down and decide to become the person you are today in every detail. Much of it happened without you realizing. Psychologists talk about implicit cognition, thoughts and beliefs that operate automatically, beyond your conscious mind. This room is filled with those moments. Times when you took a different path, not because you weighed the options, but because something inside you simply moved. And yet, these invisible choices have shaped your life. They've influenced your relationships, your habits, your sense of self. This room asks you to reflect. How much of what you are is based on things you never stopped to question? But there's no blame here, no need to regret. Your mind is always working to help you survive, to help you belong. It makes decisions fast because life demands it. So there's power in becoming aware, in seeing the patterns. Some of these choices can be brought into the light. You can decide again, with more clarity. You leave this room knowing that while not every choice is visible, you can still choose how you move forward. The room of things you'll never know. This is a room that many avoid. The room of things you'll never know. It's where your mind holds the questions that can't be answered, the truths you'll never uncover. We live in a world where knowledge is power, where certainty is comfort, but not everything can be understood. There are things about others, their thoughts, their reasons, their private struggles that you'll never fully grasp. There are things about yourself, buried in early memories, lost to time, shaped by biology, that remain mysteries. There are events, choices, outcomes that no amount of thinking will ever clarify. Your brain is not wired to like this room. It seeks patterns, explanations. When it can't find them, it often fills the gaps to create stories, assumptions, guesses, because uncertainty feels like danger. But sometimes, peace comes from accepting that not knowing is part of life. This room doesn't demand that you stop asking. It invites you to stop needing every answer, to live with the openness of uncertainty and still feel grounded. It's here that you let go of the constant search for why something happened, why someone left, why you feel what you feel. Some answers will never come, and that's not failure. It's reality. You leave this room not empty, but lighter, knowing that curiosity and peace can exist together, even when clarity does not. The room of promises you forgot. We all make promises. Some are spoken, others silent, some to others, many to ourselves. This is the room of promises you forgot, where your mind holds the commitments you made in moments of emotion and then let fade. You once told yourself you would never become like someone else, that you'd always protect your dreams, that you'd change, that you'd wait, that you'd go. Life moves, and with it, those promises sometimes fall behind. Not because they didn't matter, but because circumstances shifted, priorities evolved, or simply because they were too heavy to carry. Psychologists call this motivated forgetting, the mind's way of helping us release what no longer serves, even if it once felt essential. This room isn't filled with failure. It's filled with growth. Some promises were made from pain, others from hope, and some from fear, but not all were meant to last. As you walk through this room, you realize that forgetting some promises is not betrayal. It's adaptation. So, some promises may call you back, remind you of parts of yourself that are waiting to be honored. You leave knowing that promises shape who you are, but you choose which ones you keep alive. The room where time repeats. Have you ever felt like you're living the same day, the same mistake, the same lesson, over and over? This is the room where time repeats, where your mind holds the patterns you find yourself caught in. Life moves forward, but not always in a straight line. Some experiences loop. You meet similar people. You face the same challenges. You react the same way. Psychologists understand this through the lens of behavioral cycles, Habits of thought and action that replay because they're familiar, because they feel safe, even when they're painful. This room isn't about external time. It's about psychological time, how we relive emotions, choices, fears, how the past shows up in the present, again and again. You recognize the loops, the arguments that follow the same script, the dreams deferred in the same way, the growth paused, always at the same point. But the mind doesn't repeat for no reason. It repeats until it feels something has been understood, completed. This room isn't a trap, it's a teacher, showing you what you haven't yet faced fully. And when you see the pattern, truly see it, you begin to find a way out. You leave this room not doomed to repeat, but aware, knowing that awareness is the first step toward change. The room where you were someone else. There are times when you didn't feel like yourself. Times when, for a moment, you stepped outside of who you believed you were and became someone else. This is the room where you were someone else. A space where your mind holds the roles you've played, the identities you've tried on, the versions of you that only existed in certain places, with certain people. This doesn't mean you were false. It means you adapted. The mind is flexible. We mold. We present different parts of ourselves based on what we need, or what others expect. Psychologists refer to this as self-presentation, the ways we manage how we are perceived. In this room, you'll find moments when you laughed at things that didn't amuse you, when you agreed to things you didn't believe in, when you stood in a group and felt like an outsider wearing a familiar face. Sometimes, you became this someone else to survive, to fit in, to feel safe. Other times, it was to explore, testing who you could be, who you might become. But here's the truth, every version of you, even the ones that didn't feel fully real, are part of your story. We all contain multitudes. You're not a single, fixed identity. You are layers, shifting in response to life. This room doesn't exist to judge you. It exists to remind you that change, even temporary, is part of being human. The question is not whether you were ever someone else. It's whether you understood why. As you leave, you carry with you a deeper awareness that sometimes we lose ourselves to find out who we really are. The room of past futures. We all imagine the future, and in doing so, we build expectations. But not every future we once envisioned came true. This is the room of past futures, where your mind keeps the dreams, plans, and visions that never became reality. At one time, you believed you'd be living differently. You pictured yourself in another place, with different people, doing something else entirely, and those futures felt real. They guided your steps, your hopes, your efforts. But life shifted. Circumstances changed. You changed. Psychologically, we form attachments not just to people or things, but to ideas of what might be. This is called future-oriented memory, our brain's habit of living partly in what's next. And when those imagined futures don't arrive, we feel loss, even if the present is good. This room holds that loss. It's filled with the jobs you didn't take, the relationships that didn't grow, the versions of success you once chased. But this room isn't about regret. It's about recognition. That part of living is letting go of what we once thought would happen. You didn't fail. You adapted. And with every past future that faded, a new one took its place. As you walk through, you begin to see that even though you didn't end up where you thought you would, you've still arrived. And there are still futures ahead, ones you haven't imagined yet. The room where fear pretends to be safe. Fear is not always loud. Sometimes, fear disguises itself as safety, as caution, as reason. This is the room where fear pretends to be safe, where your mind holds the choices you made not because they were best, but because they felt secure. We often think of fear as something to fight against, but more often, fear whispers, It tells you to stay where you are, to avoid the unknown, keep things small, manageable, and it sounds reasonable. But deep down, you know there's a difference between being safe and being stuck. Psychologists call this avoidance coping, when we avoid discomfort by choosing the familiar, even when it limits us. In this room, you see the paths you didn't take, not because they were wrong, but because they were uncertain. The risks you didn't explore, the dreams you put aside because fear dressed itself up as logic. I can't afford to fail. It's not the right time. I'm not ready. Maybe you weren't. Or maybe fear just convinced you it was better not to try. This room doesn't accuse you. It helps you notice. Fear is part of survival, but it can also prevent growth. You leave this room with a clearer sense of the difference between real danger and imagined risk, knowing that sometimes what feels safe is simply fear in disguise. The room of hollow memories. Not every memory feels full. Some moments, when recalled, feel strangely empty, as if they lack weight or meaning. This is the room of hollow memories, where your mind keeps experiences that were lived, but not felt. You were there, you saw, moved through the day, but inside, something was missing. Psychologists understand this as dissociative experiences, where the mind detaches from emotion to protect itself. Sometimes it's mild, sometimes more severe. But we all have memories that feel distant, as if we were watching ourselves rather than living fully. This room holds those times. Maybe you were overwhelmed, and your mind numbed the feeling. Maybe you were just going through the motions, trying to keep up. And now, when you look back, you remember the facts, but not the feeling. This room isn't a failure. It's a record of how the mind manages what it can't always process in the moment. You leave this room understanding that not every memory has to feel vivid. Some moments pass through us quietly, and that too is part of life. The room of things left unsaid. Words matter, but sometimes what's left unsaid shapes us even more. This is the room of things left unsaid, where your mind holds the conversations that never happened, the truths you never voiced, the feelings you kept inside. There are many reasons we stay silent. Fear of hurting others, fear of being misunderstood, uncertainty about what's right. But silence doesn't erase the thought. It stores it. This room is filled with those silences. The apology you never gave, the love you never confessed, the anger you never released, and those silences echo. Psychologically, unexpressed emotion can linger, influencing how we see ourselves and others. It becomes a quiet weight. Yet, this room is not about guilt. It's about awareness. Not everything needs to be said, but knowing what was left behind helps you see what matters most to you. You leave this room reminded that while silence can protect, it can also distance. And sometimes, finding your voice is the first step toward healing. The room where you almost changed everything. There was a moment, maybe more than one, when you stood on the edge of change, when everything could have been different. This is the room where you almost changed everything, where your mind holds the crossroads, the near decisions, the times you nearly chose a new path. You felt it, didn't you? The pull, that possibility. Maybe you were ready to leave, to begin, to let go. But something stopped you. A small voice that said, "Not yet." And so, life continued as it was. Psychologists describe this as approach avoidance conflict, wanting something, but fearing it at the same time. In this room, you revisit those moments. The job you almost took, the truth you almost told, the risk you almost embraced. Almost. But almost is not nothing. It shows you were awake, were alive to possibility. This room isn't here to judge what you didn't do. It's here to remind you that you came close. And coming close means you're capable. Change doesn't always happen in a single moment. Sometimes, It takes many almost to prepare for one yes. You leave this room knowing that even if you didn't change everything then, you still can. The room of silent screams. Some emotions are too big for words, too powerful to express, yet too difficult to let go. This is the room of silent screams, where your mind keeps the feelings that demanded release but were held inside. You didn't cry out. You didn't show the world your pain. Instead, you bore it quietly, as so many of us do. There were times when you wanted to scream, when something inside you ached to be heard, to be seen, to be understood. But the scream never came. Maybe you were afraid. Maybe you believed no one would listen. Maybe you were taught to stay strong, to keep it in, to endure. So you did. Psychologists call this emotional suppression, and it's common in people who have learned that their feelings aren't safe, aren't valid, or aren't welcome. Suppression is a survival strategy. It allows you to keep moving, to avoid the risk of vulnerability. But suppressed emotions don't disappear. They settle. They sit in the body, in the mind, like pressure waiting for release. In this room, that pressure is palpable. The air feels dense, filled with the weight of unspoken pain. You can almost hear the echoes, cries that never left your lips, anger that never shook the walls, sorrow that never found its voice. These silent screams are still here, not to haunt you, but to remind you of your strength and your need. Your mind didn't betray you by holding them back. It protected you, gave you space until you could bear to feel. But now, perhaps, you are ready to acknowledge that the silence was never emptiness. It was full of everything you carried alone. As you stand here, you don't need to scream now. You only need to listen, to hear the part of you that was never allowed to speak, and to understand that healing begins not with noise, but with recognition. You leave this room with the knowledge that what was silent still mattered, and that now, you can choose to let those screams rest. The room where you watched yourself. There are moments in life when you felt disconnected from yourself, as if you were observing your own actions from a distance. This is the room where you watched yourself, where your mind keeps the memories of times when you didn't feel fully present, when you moved through life like a spectator rather than a participant. You remember those times clearly. You were there, but it didn't feel like it. You spoke, you acted, you smiled or nodded, but something about it felt detached, almost surreal. It was like watching someone else live your life, wearing your face, speaking with your voice. Psychologists refer to this as dissociation, a mental process where you separate from your thoughts, feelings, or identity, often in response to stress or overwhelm. It's not uncommon. It's the mind's way of protecting itself when reality becomes too intense or painful to bear. This room holds those moments of distance, those days or hours when you weren't fully yourself, when being was too much, and so your mind gave you space, the buffer, a pause from feeling everything all at once. You didn't choose to disconnect. It happened because your mind is built to survive, and survival, times, means stepping back. But now, standing here, you can see that disconnection wasn't permanent. You returned, slowly, perhaps uncertainly, but you came back to yourself. This room exists not to remind you of loss, but of resilience. Even when you felt absent, a part of you remained, holding on, waiting for the moment when you could feel safe again. You leave this room knowing that you've watched yourself, but you've also found yourself, and you will continue to return, each time more fully than before. The room where you thought you knew. We live much of our lives believing we understand, that we know ourselves, others, the world around us. But there are moments when what we thought we knew unravels. This is the room where you thought you knew, where your mind keeps the times when certainty gave way to doubt. You believed someone's intentions were clear until they weren't. You trusted your instincts until they failed you. You were sure of a truth until it was proven false. Psychologists speak of cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we feel when reality contradicts what we believe. Your mind doesn't like to be wrong. It prefers clarity, predictability, but life rarely stays within those lines. This room holds the discomfort of being mistaken, of realizing that your perspective was limited, your understanding incomplete. It's not an easy place. No one enjoys admitting they didn't see the whole picture. But this room isn't about shame. It's about growth. Every time you've been wrong, you've had the chance to learn, to expand your view, to deepen your empathy for others and for yourself. In this room, you see not just your errors, but your efforts. You see a mind willing to seek, to believe, to trust. And while those beliefs didn't always hold, they led you here, to a place of greater awareness. You leave this room with a softer certainty, knowing that to think you know is human, and to question is wisdom. The room of endless waiting. There is a kind of waiting that doesn't end, not because what you're waiting for is impossible, but because it always feels just out of reach. This is the room of endless waiting, where your mind holds the hopes and desires that have lingered, unfulfilled, through time. You've waited for many things, a change, a sign, a moment when everything would make sense. You've counted days, watched clocks, marked milestones, believing that soon, something would arrive to complete the picture. But soon kept moving. Psychologically, we are future-oriented beings. The brain constantly anticipates, plans, imagines. It's what keeps us striving. But when the future doesn't meet our expectations, when what we long for remains distant, waiting becomes a state of being. This room is filled with that state. The love you hoped would come, the clarity you thought would arrive, the peace you believed was just around the corner. And in waiting, you've lived. But sometimes, life in waiting feels like life on hold. This room invites you to pause, not in expectation, but in reflection. What if the waiting itself has meaning? What if the things you long for are not what shape you, but the patience, the endurance, the resilience built in their absence? You leave this room not because the waiting ends, but because you see that waiting is not all there is. The room where dreams broke. Not all dreams survive. Some begin with hope, with fire, with belief, and then they fade. This is the room where dreams broke, where your mind keeps the visions that didn't come true. You once imagined a future, a life, a version of yourself that seemed possible. You gave it time, effort, heart, but somewhere along the way, correct? Psychologists speak of goal loss, the emotional impact of realizing that something you worked toward will never be. It's grief, but not for a person, for a possibility. This room is filled with that grief. The career you let go, the relationship that ended, the part of yourself that changed. It's painful to stand here, to see what you built in your mind lying incomplete. But dreams don't break because you failed. They break because life moves. Because not everything is meant to last. Because sometimes, what we wanted wasn't what we needed. This room is not just about endings. It's about beginnings too. Because when a dream breaks, it clears space for new visions, for new paths, for new parts of yourself to emerge. You leave this room carrying not just the pieces of what was lost, but the strength to imagine again. The room where you felt nothing. There are moments in life when you expect to feel something, anything, but instead, there is nothing. This is the room where you felt nothing, but quite almost hollow space in your mind that stores the times when emotions, for reasons unknown or unspoken, simply didn't come. You were there. The moment was real. The situation called for joy, or grief, or rage. But inside, you were still. Not peaceful, not content, just empty. You tried to summon something, some reaction, but it wasn't there. And so, you wondered, why can't I feel? Psychologists recognize this as emotional numbness, often a response to prolonged stress, trauma, or deep exhaustion. It's not a failure to feel, it's the mind stepping in to protect itself from what it perceives as too much. When the emotional system is overwhelmed, it can shut down, like a breaker tripping to keep the lights from burning out completely. In this room, you can walk through the scenes where you were present in body but distant in soul. The funeral where tears wouldn't come. The celebration where you smiled out of habit. The relationship that ended and left you more puzzled than pained. This isn't a void without meaning. It's a sign that your mind needed space, needed pause. Feeling nothing wasn't the absence of care. It was a temporary retreat. Over time, numbness can lift, like fog burned off by sunlight. Slowly, the emotions return, not always with force, but with clarity. As you stand in this room, you realize you're not broken. You never were. You were protecting something fragile inside you. And maybe now, that part of you is ready to feel again. You leave this room not to rush into emotion, but with a gentleness toward yourself, knowing that even emptiness has its reasons, and those reasons deserve respect. The room of distant joys. There was a time when joy felt near, bright, vivid, almost effortless. But as life moved forward, some of that light faded. This is the room of distant joys, where your mind keeps the memories of happiness that once filled you but now seem far away. You remember them. The laughter that echoed through summer air, the touch of someone who made you feel seen, the triumph of a long-sought victory. These moments still live inside you, but they feel dimmer now. Not gone, but softened by time, by change, by everything that came after. Psychologists describe this as hedonic adaptation, the way we grow used to joy, even great joy, as our mind constantly adjusts to what becomes familiar. What once thrilled you becomes normal, expected, or, over time, distant. In this room, those joyful moments sit like treasures, slightly out of reach. They remind you of who you were, what you loved, and how much you've grown since then. But they also remind you that joy, like all feelings, is not permanent. It comes and goes, to visits, and then it leaves. Yet, even distant joy still has power. The warmth you feel when you remember it, that's still real. The smile that flickers when a memory surfaces, that's still joy. Just quieter now. This room is not about loss, it's about connection. You've lived brightly, deeply. The joy you feel now may not match what you once had, but it's built on the same foundation. As you leave this room, you realize that even if joy changes form, it never fully disappears. So it's sometimes quietly, sometimes just around the corner, ready to return in ways you don't expect. The room where you hid. Everyone has moments when they need to disappear, not from others, but from themselves, from expectations, from the weight of being seen. This is the room where you hid, where your mind keeps the times when stepping away felt safer than standing tall. You remember these times, though perhaps not clearly. The days when you pulled back, stayed quiet, avoided the spotlight, when you blended in, hoping not to be noticed. Not because you had nothing to give, but because giving felt too hard. Psychologists understand this through avoidance coping, a response to stress where you withdraw to protect yourself from emotional harm. It's natural. When the world feels too sharp, the mind builds shelter. This room holds those shelters. You see the places you retreated to, the excuses you made, the invitations declined, the dreams delayed. You hid not out of weakness, but out of a need for safety. Hiding gave you time to heal, to think, to gather strength. But hiding also became a habit, and habits, once safe, can become cages. In this room, you begin to see that what once protected you now holds you back. The world hasn't become softer, but maybe you have become stronger. You leave this room not to expose yourself to everything all at once, but to take one step out, to begin showing up, slowly, on your own terms. The room of faded truths. There are truths you once believed without question. Ideas about who you are, what matters, what's right. But over time, some of those truths began to fade. This is the room of faded truths, where your mind stores the beliefs that no longer hold the certainty they once did. You look around and see them, principles, convictions, definitions of self. Some still feel familiar, but others seem distant, like echoes of a younger version of you. This isn't about losing your way. It's about growth. Psychologists speak of cognitive restructuring, the process of re-evaluating beliefs in light of new experiences. Life challenges what we think we know. Loss, they all shift our understanding. In this room, you feel the pull of the past and the reality of the present. You once believed people never change, but you know they can. You once thought strength meant never bending, but you see that flexibility is strength. These faded truths aren't failures. They're markers of your journey. Some ideas must fade so others can rise. You leave this room more open, more curious, knowing that truth is not always about holding firm, but about holding wisely. The room of small regrets. Regret is often seen as heavy, tied to big mistakes or lost opportunities. But there's another kind, quiet, persistent. This is the room of small regrets, where your mind keeps the little things you wish had been different. You didn't say something kind when you could have. You missed a chance to help. You chose comfort over courage. These regrets aren't overwhelming. They don't dominate your thoughts, but they sit in the corners, gently reminding you of what could have been, of who you could have been in those small moments. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking, the mental habit of imagining alternatives, especially when we believe a minor change might have led to a better outcome. In this room, you feel the tug of those thoughts, the what ifs, the if-onlys. Yet, these small regrets carry meaning. They reveal your values, kindness, honesty, presence. They show where your heart still longs to grow. This room isn't about punishment. It's about reflection. As you leave, you understand that while small regrets can't be undone, they can shape better choices ahead. The room of unseen tears. Not every tear finds its way to the surface. Some stay hidden, trapped behind the eyes, behind the smile, behind the carefully crafted expressions of strength. This is the room of unseen tears, a space in your mind where sorrow was carried quietly, privately, when no one was watching or when no one could be allowed to see. You have walked through life holding back more than anyone knows. You've faced days when the world expected you to keep moving, to show up, to perform, even when something inside you was heavy, trembling, on the edge of breaking. But you didn't break, not in public, not where it would have been noticed. Instead, you tucked those feelings away, deep within. Psychologists speak of emotional suppression, the conscious or unconscious decision to push feelings aside. It's not just avoidance. It's survival. It's what happens when crying feels unsafe, when showing vulnerability might bring more pain than release. Suppression is not weakness. It's your mind's way of protecting you from being overwhelmed. In this room, the air is thick with what was never spoken, never expressed. The sadness you hid when you had to be strong for others. The grief you buried because life didn't give you time to grieve properly. The fear you masked because you didn't want to seem fragile. All of it lives here, quietly echoing through the walls, waiting not to harm you, but to be acknowledged. These unseen tears are not shameful. They're not a sign that you didn't feel enough. In fact, they are proof that you felt deeply, but had to carry it alone. And there's a different kind of strength in that. A strength that doesn't shout or seek attention, but endures. Perhaps you've wondered why certain moments still linger, why certain memories feel unfinished. Often, it's because the emotions tied to them never had the chance to fully breathe. They stayed compressed, unresolved, suspended in time. And though you've kept moving forward, these emotions stayed behind, in this room, waiting for you to notice them. As you stand here now, you don't need to cry. You don't need to unravel. But you can, maybe for the first time, allow yourself to recognize the weight you carried, the resilience it took, the loneliness it brought. Tears are not just for others to see. They are for you to feel, to understand, to release. And even the ones that never fell have a place in your story. You leave this room not with guilt, but with compassion for the version of yourself who had to be silent, who didn't have the space or safety to let it all out. You know now that those tears mattered, even if they stayed unseen. And it's not too late to feel what you once had to hide. The room where hope faded. Hope is what carries us forward, even when the path is unclear. But hope is not invincible. It can fade, slowly, quietly, until we hardly notice it's gone. This is the room where hope faded, where your mind stores the moments when believing became too heavy, when dreams slipped through your fingers, and when you let go, not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't hold on any longer. You've hoped for many things in your life, for love, for healing, for answers, for something better. Sometimes, hope burned brightly, lighting up everything around you. It gave you strength. It gave you purpose. But other times, flickered, weakened by disappointment, by silence, by the relentless weight of waiting. This room holds those flickers, the soft dying embers of hopes you once cherished. Psychologists talk about learned helplessness, the condition that arises when repeated efforts lead to no result, when striving is met not with success but with resistance or indifference. The mind, recognizing the pain of repeated failure, starts to withdraw. It protects you by telling you not to try, not to expect, not to hope. But letting hope fade doesn't make you weak. It means you've reached a threshold. It means your spirit needed rest. In this room, you remember the specific hopes that faded over time, the goals you no longer pursue, the relationships you stopped believing in, the inner voice that once said, maybe, and now says, no more. These aren't failures, they are pauses, markers of change. You don't have to reignite every old hope. Some are meant to fade, to make room for something new. Because hope is not a fixed thing. It adapts. It can grow in new directions, even after old branches have withered. As you sit with the faded hopes in this room, you begin to see them differently, not as broken promises, but as lessons in strength and surrender. They taught you limits, boundaries, the importance of letting go when holding on hurts more than it helps. Leaving this room doesn't mean you'll never hope again. It means you'll hope differently, with more wisdom, with more care, and with the understanding that even when hope fades, you can still move forward, still live, still find meaning. The room of what could have been. Every life is filled with possibilities, some realized, many not. This is the room of what could have been, where your mind keeps the paths not taken, the choices left unexplored, the lives you imagined but never lived. You've stood at crossroads, unsure. You've made decisions, some with confidence, some with doubt. And with each choice, you left behind another life, a different version of yourself. Over time, these alternatives have formed in your mind, not as regrets, but as shadows. You wonder, what if? What if I had stayed? What if I had gone? What if I had dared? Psychologists speak of counterfactual thinking, the process of imagining alternate outcomes, comparing reality to possibilities. It's a natural, human thing. We all reflect on our choices, trying to understand how we became who we are, and how things might have been different. In this room, you walk among those alternate lives. The career you didn't pursue, the person you didn't love, the dream you set aside. These lives aren't better or worse, they are simply different. They represent your desires, your fears, your growth. It's easy to get lost here, to feel the pull of longing. But this room isn't about sorrow. It's about reflection, about honoring the complexity of choice. Every decision shapes your path. And though you can't live every possible life, you can learn from the ones you didn't choose. They show you what matters, what calls to you still, what might yet be part of your future. As you leave this room, you carry not the weight of what could have been, but the clarity of what still can be. The room of forgotten strength. There are times in life when you survive things you didn't think you could, when you faced something difficult, something that shook you, and yet, somehow, you carried on. But the strangest thing about strength is how easy it is to forget. This is the room of forgotten strength, a place in your mind where the moments you endured, the times you were brave without knowing, are quietly kept. You don't often visit this room, maybe because you don't think you need to, or because the world keeps telling you to move on, to leave those hard times behind. But while you may have left the pain, you also left the power that got you through it. In the middle of hardship, strength doesn't feel like strength. It feels like necessity. It feels like getting up one more time, not because you feel capable, but because you don't have another option. You didn't think, I'm strong. You thought, I have to. Psychologists talk about survival mode, a mental and emotional state where you function through instinct, focus, and grit. You do what needs to be done, often without realizing the cost or the courage it takes. This room is filled with those times. The night you didn't sleep, but faced the next day anyway. The conversation you feared, but had anyway. The pain you felt, but didn't let define you. You were strong, not in ways the world applauds, but in quiet, essential ways that kept you going. And yet, you've forgotten. You've told yourself it wasn't that bad, that others have had it worse, that you didn't do anything special. But here, in this room, you can see it differently. You can see that you stood in places others might have fallen, that you bore weights others didn't see, that you continued, even when you didn't know where you were going. This strength wasn't about winning. It wasn't about being the best. It was about being there, still standing, still breathing, still trying. This room doesn't ask you to be proud. It asks you to remember, because the strength you had then is still in you now. You may not need it every day. You may not feel it often, but it hasn't left. And the next time you doubt yourself, the next time you think, I can't, this room is proof that you can. You leave this room not with your head held high, but with your heart steadied, knowing that what you've survived is not just a story of pain, but a story of power, quiet power, enduring power, yours. The room where you waited too long. There are moments in life when hesitation became habit, when you stood at the edge of a decision, a change, and waited. This is the room where you waited too long, where your mind holds the times you paused, not because it wasn't the right time, but because you feared it never could be. You remember those moments, when the words almost left your mouth, but didn't, when your hand hovered over the phone, but never dialed, when you saw an opening, felt the urge to leap, but told yourself, just a little longer. Waiting is sometimes wise. To give space, perspective. But there's a kind of waiting that isn't about wisdom, it's about fear. Psychologists describe analysis paralysis, a state where overthinking blocks action. You wanted the perfect moment, the perfect certainty. You weighed the options, again and again, until the moment passed. In this room, you see the things that didn't happen, not because they couldn't, but because you didn't move in time. The opportunity that faded, the connection that cooled, the risk that turned into regret. You didn't wait because you didn't care. You waited because you cared too much, because acting meant risking something, plus failure, exposure. And so you stood still, believing that more time would make it easier. But time is not always kind to hesitation. Sometimes it turns possibility into distance. This room isn't about blaming yourself. It's about understanding. Understanding that fear wears many faces. It often dresses up as reason, as caution, as patience. You were trying to protect yourself, to make sure you didn't step into something you couldn't handle. But in protecting yourself, you missed chances to grow. And that's okay, because now, as you stand here, you can feel the lesson not as punishment, but as permission. Permission to act before certainty. Permission to speak before the perfect words arrive. Permission to move, even if the ground feels unsteady. You leave this room knowing that while you can't reclaim the moments lost to waiting, you can stop waiting now. You can decide. The room of hidden joy. Not all joy is loud. Not all happiness demands your attention. Some joy is quiet, gentle, tucked into the unnoticed corners of your life. This is the room of hidden joy, where your mind keeps the moments you missed, the small pleasures that passed before you could feel them fully. You've spent so much time chasing big happiness, waiting for milestones, for victories, for the days that shine so brightly, they block out all doubt. But life is not made only of such days. Psychologists talk about savoring, the ability to truly notice and absorb positive experiences. But in a busy life, in a mind trained to fixate on problems, on goals, and what's next, savoring becomes rare. This room holds the joy you overlooked, the sun on your skin during a quiet walk, the taste of something sweet, unnoticed between tasks, the warmth of someone's voice, lost in your rush to reply. These moments didn't disappear. They settled here, waiting to be seen. As you stand in this room, you begin to feel them, not as memories of what you lost, but as reminders of what you can still find. Joy doesn't have to be sought. It doesn't have to be planned. It lives in the present, in the spaces between effort and rest. You leave this room with eyes open, not to what you lack, but to what is already here. The room where you broke. There is a moment when holding everything together becomes impossible. When the pressure, the noise, the weight of it all crushes the last bit of strength you thought you had. This is the room where you broke, where your mind keeps the memory of collapse, the moment when pretending, enduring, and surviving weren't enough anymore. You didn't plan to break. You thought you could handle it, as you always had. You told yourself to stay strong, to keep going, to just push through one more time. But your body knew, your heart knew. Something inside you gave out, not because you were weak, but because you'd carried too much, for too long. Psychologists speak of emotional burnout, a state where mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion meet. It doesn't happen all at once. Built slowly, over weeks, even years, until the smallest thing tips the balance. In this room, you see that moment. Maybe it was a night when tears wouldn't stop. Maybe it was a day when you couldn't get out of bed, couldn't speak, couldn't care. Maybe it was a choice to walk away, to stop trying, to admit you couldn't anymore. Breaking felt like failure, but it wasn't. It was honesty. This room doesn't shame you. It shows you the truth. You're human. You have limits. And recognizing those limits wasn't the end. It was the beginning of healing. When you broke, you found something else. You found space. You found quiet. You found the first breath after holding it in for too long. Breaking didn't destroy you. It freed you. You leave this room not afraid of breaking again, but aware. Aware that you don't have to wait until you break to rest. Aware that strength sometimes means stopping, letting go, falling apart, so you can rebuild. The room where you found yourself again. After the noise, the silence, after the storm, a fragile stillness. This is the room where you found yourself again, where your mind keeps the quiet, slow return to wholeness. Not the grand revelation, not the sudden transformation, but the gentle rediscovery of who you've always been. You thought you were lost, that the version of you who once felt alive, curious, open, that person was gone, swallowed by the demands of life, by the weight of sorrow, by the long stretch of numb days. But here, in this room, you began to feel it again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It started with something small, a song that stirred something in your chest, a sunrise that made you pause, a conversation that didn't feel forced. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, the way we find meaning, resilience, and deeper values after struggle. You didn't plan to grow. You didn't chase it. It happened quietly, beneath the surface, while you rested, while you healed. In this room, you remember the moments that led you back to yourself. The first time you laughed and meant it. The first time you made a choice not out of fear, but desire. The first time you looked in the mirror and didn't turn away. You didn't become someone new. You uncovered what had been hidden, buried beneath everything life had layered on top. This room isn't about perfection. It's about presence, about knowing that you are enough, even with scars, even with questions. You leave this room not complete, but whole in your incompleteness. You're yourself, the room of quiet resentments. Some feelings are not loud or obvious. They build slowly, like sediment, settling in layers. This is the room of quiet resentments, where your mind holds the small grievances, the unspoken frustrations, the disappointments you never voiced. You didn't want to be angry. You told yourself it didn't matter, that it wasn't worth the fight. You smiled. You moved on. But something stayed. Psychologists talk about passive resentment, a low-level emotional tension that arises when needs go unmet, when boundaries are crossed, when expectations are quietly broken. It's not explosive. It simmers. In this room, you feel it. The friend who always took, but rarely gave. The moments you compromised, again and again, until you barely recognized your own needs. The times you said yes, when every part of you wanted to say no. You didn't speak, because keeping peace felt more important, because being liked felt safer than being true. But resentment grows in silence. This room doesn't ask you to rage. It asks you to see, to notice where you've given too much, where you've erased yourself. Not to blame, to understand. Resentment is a signal, a sign that something in you needs attention. As you leave this room, you don't have to confront everyone. You only need to listen to yourself, to honor what you feel, and to begin, perhaps for the first time, to take up space. The room of unfinished endings. Not everything ends cleanly. Some chapters remain open, some stories half told. This is the room of unfinished endings, where your mind keeps the things that never found closure. You've walked away from things still attached, relationships that faded but never truly ended, goals that were abandoned but still echo, words you never got to say. Psychologists speak of ambiguous loss, a kind of grief for things that are gone, but not really. People who are still alive but no longer in your life. Dreams that still linger but will never be realized. In this room, you feel the pull of those loose threads, the questions unanswered, the longing unfulfilled. You want to close the door, to put it all behind you. But some things don't end the way we want. Some things stay open, and that's okay. This room isn't about finishing. It's about accepting, about living with the messiness of human experience. You leave knowing that peace doesn't always come from endings. Sometimes, it comes from embracing what remains unresolved. The room of words you needed to hear. There are things in life that shape us deeply, events, people, choices. But sometimes, what shapes us most is what never happened. Not the loud moments, not the ones we can point to easily, but the absence of something we longed for. This is the room of words you needed to hear, where your mind keeps the empty spaces left behind by silence. The things no one said, but that you desperately needed. You've walked through many moments in your life where a simple word could have changed everything. A moment when someone could have looked you in the eye and said, "I'm proud of you." A time when you needed someone to say, "You're not alone." A day when, just once, someone might have said, "You are enough, just as you are." But instead, there was nothing, just the noise of the world moving on, and your thoughts trying to fill the silence. Psychologists call this emotional neglect, not the presence of something harmful, but the absence of something essential. It's not about being hurt directly, it's about being unseen, unheard, unfelt. And when that happens, your mind doesn't simply forget. It keeps a record. In this room, you feel those absences like echoes. The approval you waited for but never received. The comfort that was never offered. The love that stayed locked inside someone else, never reaching you. You didn't always know you needed those words. Not at the time. But now, looking back, you see how different things might have been if just once someone had spoken into the silence. And yet, this room isn't here to remind you of what you lacked in order to make you feel small. It's here to show you something else, that the words we needed can still be spoken, even if we're the ones who have to say them. There is power in voice, power in naming what was missing, power in giving yourself the comfort that others couldn't. You can say now what they didn't. You can whisper, "I deserved better." You can tell yourself, "It wasn't my fault." You can affirm, "I am worthy, even if no one told me so." These words matter, even now. The silence that once surrounded you doesn't have to define you. It was real. It left a mark. But you are here, still standing, still breathing, still capable of speaking. You leave this room with something different, not just the memory of silence, but the realization that you can create sound. You can fill the space with your own voice, your own truth, and perhaps, the next time you stand in front of someone else, you will be the one who says the thing they most need to hear. The room of second chances you never took. Life doesn't always offer one chance. Sometimes, opportunities return quietly, unexpectedly, like a door left slightly open. This is the room of second chances you never took, where your mind keeps the moments when life offered you a new beginning, but you hesitated. You've seen these chances. The friend who reached out after years of silence, waiting for a reply that never came. The passion you once gave up on, that sparked again, but you ignored it. The moment you could have tried again, but didn't. Psychologists speak of approach avoidance conflict, the inner tension between wanting something and fearing it. Second chances often come with hope, but also risk. The risk of failure, of rejection, of being hurt again. In this room, you see those chances, suspended in time. The email you never answered. The apology you never gave. The step you didn't take because fear whispered, "What if it's worse this time?" You told yourself you had a reason. You told yourself the timing wasn't right. You told yourself it was better to leave the past alone. But the truth is, part of you wanted to try. This room is not filled with regret. It's filled with possibilities that asked for your courage. And though you didn't choose them, they are still part of your story. Not all second chances are meant to be taken. Some are there to teach you about yourself, about what you value, what you fear, what you're willing to fight for. And while you may never reclaim those moments, new ones still come. Every day, a chance to reach, to risk, to begin again. You leave this room not to mourn what you didn't do, but to notice the next door that opens. The room where you weren't enough. There are times when you gave your all, and it still wasn't enough. When you poured your heart, your effort, your time into something or someone, and they needed more than you could give. This is the room where you weren't enough, where your mind holds the moments of inadequacy that linger long after they've passed. You remember them. The job you didn't get, despite your best effort. The love that ended, even though you tried to hold it together. The goal you reached for but couldn't grasp. Each time, you asked yourself, what more could I have done? Psychologists explore this through self-worth theory, the belief that our value is tied to our achievements, our ability to succeed. When we fail, or when things end, we don't just question the outcome. We question ourselves. In this room, you feel that weight, the belief that you lacked something essential, that if you had been better, stronger, smarter, things would have been different. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you won't meet the mark because the mark keeps moving or because it was never yours to reach. Not being enough in one moment does not mean you are not enough. This room isn't here to shame you. It's here to show you that falling short doesn't define you, that what you gave was real, even if it wasn't returned. You leave this room with a softer truth. You are whole, even when others don't see it. The room of roads not taken. For every step you've taken, there's a step you didn't. For every decision made, a dozen unmade. This is the room of roads not taken, where your mind holds the lives you might have lived had you chosen differently. You wonder about them sometimes, in the quiet moments. The job offer you turned down, the city you didn't move to, the relationship you walked away from or stayed in. Each choice defined the path you're on, but left other paths unexplored. Psychologists describe this as counterfactual thinking, the mental habit of imagining what if. What if you had said yes instead of no? What if you had been braver or more cautious? Would you be happier? Would you still be you? In this room, those alternate lives feel real. You see yourself in them, different, but still you. Living in places you've never been. Loving people you never met. Becoming someone you almost were. It's tempting to think those roads were better, that the life you didn't choose was the one you should have. But those lives are only ideas. You made choices based on who you were, with what you knew, in the moment you stood in. And while those roads are closed, your road is still open. You leave this room with respect, not just for what you chose, but for all the versions of you that could have been, but weren't. The room of fears that never happened. Fear is a powerful thing. It can shape your choices, limit your dreams, hold you back. But not all fears come true. This is the room of fears that never happened, where your mind keeps the worries, the anxieties, the nightmares that lived only in your thoughts. You remember them clearly, the moments you lay awake, heart racing, imagining the worst, the fear of losing someone, the fear of failing, the fear of being hurt, alone, forgotten. Psychologists refer to anticipatory anxiety, the experience of suffering in advance. You felt the pain of things that never came. You prepared for storms that never arrived. In this room, those fears still echo, not as threats, but as reminders. You see now how much energy you gave to protecting yourself from shadows, how much life was shaped by what didn't happen. But this room isn't about guilt. It's about understanding. Fear tries to keep you safe, but safety without living is just another kind of loss. You leave this room lighter, knowing that fear will come, but it doesn't have to rule. The room of apologies you never received. There are wounds that linger, not because of what was done, but because no one ever said, "I'm sorry." This is the room of apologies you never received, where your mind keeps the moments when someone could have made it right, but didn't. You've carried these moments quietly. Times when you were hurt, misunderstood. Times when someone's words, or silence, left you aching, and you waited, hoped, for acknowledgement, for a gesture, a word. anything that would let you know they saw what they did. But it never came. Psychologists speak of unresolved relational wounds, pain that persists when closure is missing. The absence of an apology can feel as heavy as the act itself, because it's not just about the event. It's about the meaning, about being seen, validated, understood. In this room, those moments return. The friend who betrayed your trust but never looked back. The family member whose words cut deep, but who acted like nothing happened. The love that ended with silence instead of truth. You didn't ask for much. Just for someone to take responsibility. Just for someone to care enough to say, I was wrong. But not everyone can. Some people don't know how to apologize. Some don't believe they need to. Some are afraid. Some are simply gone. This room is not about reopening wounds. It's about seeing them for what they are. You were hurt. You deserved better. And though their apology never came, your healing doesn't have to wait for it. You can give yourself what they couldn't. You can say, what happened mattered. You can say, I deserved an apology. You can feel the weight of it and still choose to move forward. Not because you excuse them, but because you release yourself. You leave this room not with closure from them, but with clarity for yourself. The room of things you tolerated. There are things in life we accept, not because they're right, but because we're tired, or afraid, or unsure we deserve more. This is the room of things you tolerated, where your mind keeps the compromises, the discomforts, the quiet suffering you allowed. You didn't start out this way. You had boundaries, standards. But life teaches us to bend, to endure, to stay quiet when something doesn't feel right. Psychologists call this learned endurance, the habit of tolerating pain or disrespect because we believe it's normal or necessary. In this room, you see the times you said yes when you meant no, the relationships where you gave too much, the jobs that drained you, the environments that dimmed your light. You told yourself it was fine, that it wasn't that bad, that it would get better. But inside, something ached, something new. You tolerated, not because you were weak, but because you hoped. You hoped they would change. You hoped things would shift. You hoped you could make it work. And now, in this room, you feel the cost. Tolerating too long teaches others how to treat us. And worse, it teaches us to forget ourselves. But this room isn't about regret. It's about awareness. You survived those times. You did what you could with what you knew. And now, you know more. You leave this room with a different kind of strength. The strength to choose what you will no longer accept. The room where you changed for others. There was a time when you felt the pressure, not spoken, not forced, but felt deep within, to be someone different. To change, not for yourself, but for the people around you. This is the room where you changed for others, where your mind keeps the parts of you that were bent, reshaped, or hidden to fit in, to be accepted, to be loved. You didn't mean to change. First, it was just small things. You laughed when you didn't find it funny. You agreed when you wanted to disagree. You wore what others expected. You said what they wanted to hear. You became careful not to upset, not to stand out too much, not to be too much of yourself. Psychologists describe social conformity as the natural human tendency to adapt to group norms, to seek belonging. But sometimes, conformity turns into self-betrayal. And that betrayal is often so quiet, you don't hear it happening. In this room, you walk through moments where you left yourself behind. You remember the friendship that asked you to shrink, the relationship where your voice softened until it barely existed, the job where you played a role, leaving your real self at the door every morning. You didn't do this because you lacked strength. You did this because you believed, maybe without realizing, that being fully you wasn't safe, that if you showed your whole self, they might leave. That love and acceptance were conditional, fragile, and maybe they were. But changing for others didn't protect you from pain. It only delayed it. Because there came a moment when the person you had become felt like a stranger. When you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize your own eyes. When the mask became too heavy and all you wanted was to breathe as yourself. This room is not about regret. It's about recognition. You survived by adapting. But survival is not living. You now see that the spaces where you had to change to be loved were never really love. They were transactions. And you paid with pieces of your truth. As you leave this room, you begin to gather those pieces again. Slowly, carefully. You remember the parts of you that once felt natural, the laugh, the opinions, the dreams that weren't filtered. You walk away not to become someone new, but to return to someone real. You were never too much. You were never not enough. But you choose to be you, not for them, but for yourself. The room of things you almost said. There are words that never found their way out. Words that rose in your chest, caught in your throat, and stayed there, silent, heavy, waiting. This is the room of things you almost said, where your mind keeps the sentences that were nearly spoken, but never shared. You've stood on the edge of confession more times than you can count. The moment was there. The chance was there. And still, you didn't say it. You almost told someone you loved them. You almost told someone they hurt you. You almost stood up for yourself, or for someone else. Almost. Psychologists talk about self-censorship, a psychological process where fear or habit prevents expression. You silenced yourself, not because you didn't care, but because you cared too much. Because you feared what would happen if you let those words out into the world. Would they leave? Would they laugh? Would they change how they saw you? So you swallowed the words, and the moment passed. In this room, the air is filled with echoes of things unsaid. You can almost hear them, soft but persistent. You wish you could go back. You wonder how things might have changed. But silence is not just absence, it's a choice. Sometimes, silence was your protection. Sometimes, the world wasn't ready. Sometimes, you weren't. This room isn't about shame. It's about understanding that words are powerful and timing matters. You leave this room knowing that the words you almost said were real. They mattered, and some, perhaps, still deserve to be spoken. The room of promises you broke. Promises are delicate things, easy to make, but not always easy to keep. This is the room of promises you broke, where your mind keeps the moments when your words didn't match your actions, when you failed to meet expectations, your own or others. You didn't mean to break them. When you promised, you believed. You wanted to follow through. You wanted to be reliable, trustworthy. I'll be there. I won't let you down. I'll always care. You meant it. But life changed. Or you changed. Or they changed. Psychologists describe cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we feel when our actions betray our values. Breaking a promise hurts, not just others, but yourself. It makes you question your integrity, your identity. In this room, you feel the weight of those broken words. The friend who waited for you to show up. The partner who believed your vow. The commitment you made to yourself, then abandoned. Not all promises are meant to last forever. Some were made in hope, without knowing the future. This room isn't about punishment. It's about reflection. You tried. You failed. And you learned. You leave this room not perfect, but honest. Understanding that breaking a promise doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. What matters now is the promises you keep today. The room of people you let go. Letting go is never easy, whether by choice or by force. Some people leave our lives, and we are left to carry both the memories and the absence. This is the room of people you let go, where your mind holds the names, the faces, the voices of those who were once close, but no longer walk with you. You didn't plan to let go. Some separations were slow, like the tide pulling away. Others were sudden, sharp, like doors slamming, and some, perhaps, never had closure at all. Psychologists describe attachment loss, the emotional pain that comes with losing connection, especially to those we once leaned on. In this room, they're all here. The friend who faded with time, the love that couldn't last, the mentor you outgrew. You see the good times, the laughter, the warmth, but also the reasons you had to let go, the differences, the distance. Letting go was not weakness. It was necessary. You carry both gratitude and grief. This room doesn't ask you to forget. It asks you to accept. You leave knowing that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, love is the act of releasing. The room of dreams you outgrew. Dreams are powerful. They shape us, guide us, give us purpose. But not all dreams are meant to last forever. This is the room of dreams you outgrew, where your mind keeps the ambitions, the desires, the plans that once defined you, but now feel distant. You remember them well. The dream job, the ideal relationship, the life you once thought you needed to be happy. Psychologists speak of developmental change, how our needs evolve over time, how the dreams of yesterday may no longer fit the person you've become. In this room, those dreams sit gently. You don't hate them. You don't regret them. But they no longer call to you. You've learned that growing sometimes means letting go, not because you failed, but because you've changed. This room is not about lost potential. It's about transformation. You leave with freedom to dream again in ways that reflect who you are now. The room of questions without answers. Some questions follow you, not to haunt you, but to remind you that not everything can be resolved. This is the room of questions without answers, where your mind holds the thoughts that return again and again, never finding rest. You have asked them quietly, loud, or only in dreams. Why did they walk away? What would have happened if you had stayed? Was this ever really meant for you? These questions are old companions, circling without settling, familiar and unsettling all at once. Psychologists describe cognitive closure as the need for definite answers. The mind, uncomfortable with uncertainty, seeks conclusions, often too quickly. But some questions resist being solved. They remain open, like wounds that do not bleed but never heal. In this room, the air is thick with silence. Along the walls are mirrors, each reflecting a different version of you, each one shaped by a question you could never answer. One is looking back at you, still wondering if you made the right decision. Another stands in a place you almost reached, wondering why life chose differently. You walk past clocks with no hands, books with blank pages, and doors that lead nowhere. These are not symbols of failure, but of the unknown, the truth that some things in life are not for us to know. There is comfort in certainty, but there is growth in uncertainty. You begin to see that living with unanswered questions does not weaken you. It stretches you, keeps you tender. The ache of not knowing opens space for wonder, for patience, for compassion, for yourself and for others still lost in their own uncertainties. You sit with one question, hold it in your hands. You stop demanding an answer. Instead, you simply feel its presence. And in that moment, something shifts, not the question, but your relationship to it. You no longer need it to be resolved to feel whole. As you stand, you write on the wall, not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be honored. You step outside, no longer seeking, but accepting. The room where you betrayed yourself. There is a kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than any other, the betrayal of your own truth. This is the room where you betrayed yourself, where your mind holds the moments you turned away from what you knew. In order to be accepted, to be safe, to be loved, you didn't mean to do it. It started small. You agreed when you wanted to say no. You stayed silent when you longed to speak. You followed when every part of you wanted to lead. Psychologists speak of self-alienation, the disconnection from your inner self when external approval becomes more important than inner peace. Each time you ignored your instincts, you lost a little piece of yourself. In this room, the walls are lined with masks, smiling, nodding, pleasing, each one worn for someone else. You look at them and remember the roles you played, the parts of yourself you dimmed. You pick up a journal lying on a table. Its pages are filled with words you once meant to say, actions you meant to take. You read them slowly, feeling both the pain and the power of those unrealized truths. This room does not exist to shame you, but to remind you. You survived in the only way you knew, by bending, by hiding. But survival is not living. Now you know. You write on the final page, I return to myself. The room quiets, and you step forward, not perfect, but present. The room of things that made you stronger. Not every wound weakens. Some leave behind strength. This is the room of things that made you stronger, where your mind keeps the moments that tested you, shaped you, and did not break you. You did not ask for these lessons. The loss you thought you'd never survive. The failure that left you hollow. The betrayal that cracked your trust. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, the unexpected gifts that emerge from struggle. Empathy, clarity, resilience. In this room, there are no trophies. Instead, there are scars, each one a testament. You touch one scar. Remember the night you thought was the end. But it wasn't. It was a beginning. This room is not about glorifying pain. It is about honoring the strength you never knew you had. You breathe deeply. You stand tall. You leave knowing that while life has bent you, it has also built you. The room where you finally rested. There comes a moment when the striving ends. When the noise fades. When you allow yourself to stop. This is the room where you finally rested, where your mind holds the first true breath after years of holding too much. You've been tired for so long, tired of proving, of pleasing, of pushing through. Psychologists describe emotional rest as the space where you no longer perform, where you can simply be. In this room, there are no tasks, no demands, only stillness. You lie down, not to escape, but to return to yourself. Rest is not weakness. It is the beginning of healing. You rise, not to rush, but to live, slower, softer. You leave this room lighter, with the sacred knowledge that you deserve to rest, and you will. The room of all the times you waited. There are moments in life when you pause, expecting something, a sign, a change, an answer. This is the room of all the times you waited, where your mind keeps the days, the hours, the long stretches of life spent in the in-between. You waited for love to arrive. You waited for pain to pass. You waited for someone to return. You waited for yourself to be ready. Waiting often felt safe. It was a space between choices, a breath between action. You told yourself that time would bring clarity. That patience would be rewarded, that if you just stayed still, the world would move and meet you where you stood. Psychologists refer to temporal uncertainty, the mental state of existing in suspension, hoping for control over what cannot be rushed. Waiting gives hope form, but also becomes a weight. In this room, clocks line the walls, but none of them tick, each frozen at a moment when you believed that soon, something would change. You see yourself pacing, sitting, standing at doors, checking your reflection, your phone, your thoughts. Some waiting was necessary, but some kept you from living. Time passed while you stood still. You notice now how much life you placed on hold, smiles you delayed, steps you postponed, dreams you put aside because you believed their time had not yet come. But here, in this room, time is not your enemy. It is a reminder that waiting is not always about readiness. It is sometimes about fear. Fear of what happens when you move forward. Fear of finding out the answer. Fear of what comes after. You sit for a moment, not in waiting, but in reflection. What if now is enough? You rise and walk toward the door. There is no ticking clock behind you, only the steady rhythm of your own breath. You leave knowing that while patience is a gift, your life will not wait for you to live it. The room of things you lost. Loss is a quiet teacher. This is the room of things you lost, where your mind holds the people, the places, the parts of yourself that are no longer here, but still shape you. You have lost more than you allow yourself to remember. A friendship that faded without reason. A home that no longer holds your footsteps. A version of yourself that no longer fits. Psychologists speak of grief integration, the process by which we carry loss, not to forget, but to grow around it. In this room, shelves hold small tokens, a photo, a note, a key with no lock. Each one pulls at something tender inside. You trace the edges of these memories, feeling both sorrow and gratitude. To lose something means you once had it, once loved it, once held it close. You cannot replace what is gone, but you can honor it. This room is not heavy with sadness. It is alive with remembrance. You do not need to move on. You only need to move forward, carrying what matters, releasing what no longer does. You leave, not empty, but open. The room where you forgave yourself. Forgiveness is often offered to others, but hardest when given to yourself. This is the room where you forgave yourself, where your mind holds the moment you finally laid down blame and chose to heal. You carry guilt like armor, for the mistakes you made, for the people you hurt, for the chances you missed. You replayed those moments, believing that punishment was proof of care. Psychologists call this self-compassion deficit, the belief that forgiveness is something you deserve least. In this room, mirrors show the times you stumbled, but they also show you now, older, wiser, softer. You kneel, not in shame, but in acceptance. You whisper, "I did the best I could." And for the first time, you believe it. This room fills with light, not from forgetting, but from grace. You leave lighter, knowing you are more than your past. You are the love you offer yourself now. The room of things you accepted. Acceptance is not surrender, it is understanding. This is the room of things you accepted, where your mind holds the truths you stopped resisting, the realities you embraced not with joy, but with peace. You once fought against them. You fought against the loss. You fought against the change. You fought against the parts of yourself you wished were different. You believed that if you resisted hard enough, you could bend the world to your will. That effort could replace inevitability. That pain could be pushed away if you just refused to let it in. Psychologists speak of radical acceptance, the act of acknowledging reality as it is, without judgment, without denial. It is not about giving up. It is about releasing the struggle with what cannot be changed. In this room, you see moments when you laid down your arms, not because you lost, but because you saw that winning was no longer the point. The love that didn't return, the dream that didn't fit, the body that carries you, imperfect but strong. Acceptance came slowly, like dawn. It wasn't a choice made once, but a practice, returned to again and again. You walk through this room and feel it's quiet. There is no tension here, no unfinished arguments, only breath. You remember the first time you said, "This is how it is," and felt no anger. The first time you looked at yourself, or someone else, and thought, "I can live with this. I can still love." Acceptance is not settling. It is seeing clearly and choosing to stay. You leave this room grounded, knowing that peace begins where resistance ends. The room of chances you took. Life is shaped by the risks we dare to take. This is the room of chances you took, where your mind keeps the moments when you stepped forward, unsure of the outcome, but certain of the need to try. You remember the fear, the tremble before the leap, the silence before the confession, the hesitation before the first step. You didn't know what would happen. You hoped. You doubted. But still, you acted. Psychologists explore risk tolerance, the individual capacity to face uncertainty. But courage is not about being fearless. It is about moving through fear. In this room, light pours through open windows. The air is alive with possibility. On one wall, a mural of all the times you said yes, when no would have been safer, when staying still would have been easier. You feel the thrill of those moments again. The decision to love, the choice to leave, the chance to create. Not every risk led to joy. Some brought pain, but all brought growth. You walk to a table and find a single note. What would life be without the unknown? You smile. You leave this room ready, not for certainty, but for the next beautiful risk. The room of love you gave freely. Love is most beautiful when it is given without condition. This is the room of love you gave freely, where your mind holds the moments when you offered your heart, not to gain, but simply to give. You loved when it wasn't returned. You loved when it wasn't easy. You loved without asking for more. Psychologists speak of unconditional positive regard, the ability to offer care without expectation, to hold space for others as they are. In this room, warmth radiates from every corner. The walls are covered in soft memories. The hand you held without being asked. The kindness you offered to a stranger. The forgiveness you gave without demand. You see that loving freely was not weakness, it was strength. You chose to love, even when it hurt, even when it meant letting go. This room reminds you that love is never wasted. It shapes you. It expands you. You leave with your heart open, not empty. You know now that to love freely is to live fully. The room of things you learned too late. There are lessons that come gently, and lessons that arrive too late, long after they could have changed what needed changing. This is the room of things you learned too late, where your mind holds the wisdom gained in hindsight, after time, after loss, after choices made that could not be undone. You didn't know then what you know now. You didn't know that waiting wouldn't make things easier. You didn't know that not saying goodbye would stay with you. You didn't know that your worth didn't depend on their approval. Psychologists describe retrospective learning, the process of making sense of past events, sometimes with regret, sometimes with grace. Your mind replays moments, now with clarity, now with pain. In this room, you see echoes of your younger self, so certain, so hopeful, so unaware. You feel no anger toward them, only a quiet sorrow, mixed with compassion. There is a letter on the table, written to the person you were. It begins, you did not fail by not knowing. You only became wiser by living. The room is not heavy. It is soft, reflective. You gather the lessons, speak your heart sooner, trust your instincts, let go before breaking. You leave, knowing that learning too late is still learning, and there is still time. The room of pain you hid. Some pain is not shared, not shown, not spoken. This is the room of pain you hid, where your mind holds the moments when you smiled through the ache, when you carried what no one else could see. You didn't want to be a burden. You didn't want them to worry. You didn't want to appear weak. So you tucked it away. Psychologists call this emotional suppression, the conscious or unconscious avoidance of showing distress. But hidden pain still exists. It lingers in the body, in the breath, in the silence between words. In this room, the walls hum with quiet sorrow. You see photographs of days when you looked fine, but weren't. You remember the conversations where you laughed, while inside, you longed to be asked, "Are you really okay?" No one knew. Maybe because you didn't let them. Maybe because they didn't look closely. You hid pain to protect yourself, to protect others. But now, It asks to be seen. You touch one memory gently, and it softens. This room does not ask you to relive it, only to acknowledge it was real. You were hurting. You deserved care. You leave lighter, ready to share more, to carry less alone. The room where you stopped pretending. There comes a time when the mask becomes too heavy, when pretending no longer feels like safety but a prison. This is the room where you stopped pretending, where your mind holds the moment you chose to be real, no matter the cost. You pretended for a long time. You pretended to be happy when you were breaking. You pretended to be strong when you were tired. You pretended to belong when you felt alone. Psychologists speak of authenticity fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from living out of alignment with your true self. In this room, the walls are bare. No performances, no decorations, just you. You see the moment you first said, "I'm not okay," the moment you walked away, the moment you cried, not in secret, but in front of someone who mattered. Freedom lives here. You breathe deeply, no longer afraid of being seen. You leave this room whole, not because you are perfect, but because you are true. The room of peace you created. Peace is not always found. Sometimes it is built. This is the room of peace you created, where your mind holds the choices, the boundaries, the quiet moments that led you to calm. You didn't grow up with peace. You didn't stumble into it. You carved it out from chaos, from noise, from the storms of others. Psychologists call this self-regulation, the ability to create internal balance, even when the world doesn't offer it. In this room, there is light, there is space, there is stillness. You remember saying no and meaning it. You remember walking away and not looking back. You remember resting without guilt. This peace was not given. It was made slowly, bravely. You sit for a while, feeling it in your bones. You leave this room with a promise to protect what you've built and to return whenever the world becomes too loud. The room of boundaries you didn't set. There are moments when you said yes, but wanted to say no. Moments when you stayed silent, though every part of you wanted to speak. This is the room of boundaries you didn't set, where your mind holds the times you allowed too much, gave too much, without protecting yourself. You wanted to be kind. You wanted to be loved. You wanted to be easy to be around. So you let them talk over you. You let them take from you. You let them stay, long after they should have gone. Psychologists call this people-pleasing, a pattern born from the fear of rejection or conflict. At its root is a desire for safety. If you keep others happy, maybe they won't leave. Maybe they won't hurt you. But over time, the cost became clear. In this room, the walls bear the marks of overstepped lines. Conversations where you didn't speak up. Favors you gave that left you drained. Apologies you offered for things that weren't your fault. You walk past mirrors that reflect not just your face, but your energy. Faded, tired, stretched thin. You touch a memory where you let someone else's need drown out your own. And you feel the ache, not just of what they took, but of what you gave away without permission. This room isn't about blame. It's about recognition. You see now that boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to real connection. Boundaries teach others how to love you, how to respect you, how to stay in your life without taking from your soul. You breathe deeply and say, "No" is a sentence I'm allowed to speak. You leave this room ready, not to fight, but to protect the space within you that is sacred. The room of joy you didn't trust. Joy is a visitor we sometimes fear. This is the room of joy you didn't trust, where your mind holds the moments when happiness knocked, but you hesitated to open the door. You felt it rise, unexpected, a lightness, a hope, and just as quickly, you silenced it. What if it doesn't last? What if I don't deserve this? What if something bad follows this good? Psychologists call this foreboding joy, the habit of fearing happiness. of preparing for the fall even before you rise. In this room, laughter echoes faintly, as if afraid to be heard. You walk through memories where you dimmed your own light. You didn't dance, because what if they stared? You didn't celebrate, because what if it was too soon? You didn't love fully, because what if it ended? Joy became something to manage, not something to feel. But now, you touch one of those moments, a small one, a smile, and let it stay. You notice how your body softens, how the fear loosens its grip. This room isn't about the joy you missed. It's about the joy that's still possible. You leave with a whisper, "I will trust joy to hold me, even if only for a moment." The room of words that healed you. Some words arrive like rain after drought. This is the room of words that healed you, where your mind holds the sentences, the phrases, the simple truths that helped you breathe again. Not all healing is loud. Sometimes, it's a whisper. I see you. You matter. You are enough. These words came from different places. A friend, the stranger, sometimes your own voice, surprising you. Psychologists describe affirmation memory, the way positive, affirming words stay with us, shaping our self-view, restoring what was broken. In this room, the walls are covered in these words, glowing softly. You run your fingers over them, feeling their weight, their warmth. There was the time someone told you it wasn't your fault, and the shame began to lift. The time someone said, "You're not alone," and the darkness softened. The time you told yourself, "I can try again," and you did. These words did not erase the pain, but they gave you something to hold. You sit for a moment, letting the words fill you. You leave this room carrying them, ready to offer them to others. The room of moments you felt truly alive. Life isn't always measured in years, but in moments, brief flashes when everything felt vivid and whole. This is the room of moments you felt truly alive, where your mind holds the fragments of time when you were fully present, fully yourself, unburdened by past or future. You didn't plan these moments. They arrived unexpectedly. The time the rain soaked you, and you didn't run. The time your laughter echoed, pure and unfiltered. The time your heart raced, not with fear, but with a. Psychologists call this flow state, when you are so immersed in experience that you lose sense of separation, of effort. You were not thinking about life, you were living it. In this room, sunlight streams through windows, illuminating memories like stained glass. Each one colorful, sharp, unforgettable. You feel the wind from that mountain you climbed. You hear the song that played when you first felt love. You taste the simple meal shared with someone who mattered. These moments did not ask for perfection. They asked only for presence. You touch one memory, and it breathes again. Your skin remembers. Your chest lifts. This room reminds you that being alive is not about what you own or what you achieve, but about what you feel, deeply, fully. You leave with a promise, not to chase these moments, but to notice them when they come. The room of things you'll never know. Some knowledge will always be out of reach. This is the room of things you'll never know, where your mind holds the mysteries you have lived alongside, the truths that stayed hidden, the outcomes never revealed. You ask the questions. Why did they stay silent? What would have happened if you had tried? What did they feel when you walked away? Psychologists speak of intolerance of uncertainty, the struggle to accept the unknown. You wanted to understand, to be sure, to tie every loose end into a neat story. But life isn't always neat. In this room, there are closed books, sealed letters, paths that fade into mist. You walk among them, feeling both the pull and the release. You remember searching, obsessing, hoping that one day it would all make sense. But here, in this quiet, you feel something new. Some things don't need to be known to be lived. You stand in front of a mirror, And it does not reflect the past or the future. Only you. Now, you breathe and let the unanswered rest. You leave this room, not empty, but at peace with mystery. The room where you found your voice. There was a time when you were quiet, not because you had nothing to say, but because you were afraid to speak. This is the room where you found your voice, where your mind holds the moments you stepped into your truth, no longer hidden, no longer small. You once swallowed your words. You feared they would be too much. You feared they would be ignored. You feared they would change everything. Psychologists describe assertive emergence, the process of reclaiming one's right to express, to be heard, to exist fully. In this room, echoes rise, not of silence, but of sound. The first time you said, "I need," and meant it. The first time you said, "Stop," and didn't waver. The first time you said, "I am," without apology. You walk past pages of your thoughts, once hidden, now shared. You feel the strength that grew with every word spoken, every truth revealed. Your voice is not loud, but it is steady. You leave this room standing taller, knowing that your voice is not a weapon, it is a bridge. And you will speak, not to conquer, but to connect. The room of grace you offered others. There are times in life when you gave something that cost you, something invisible, something others might never have noticed. This is the room of grace you offered others, where your mind holds the moments you chose to extend forgiveness, patience, or understanding, not because it was deserved, but because you could not carry anger any longer. You remember the hurt clearly, the careless words, the broken promises, the silence when you needed presence. You remember standing at the edge of your own resentment, feeling the weight of what had been done to you, knowing you could hold it forever if you wished. But something in you shifted, not because they apologized, not because they changed, but because you needed space inside yourself. Psychologists speak of empathic forgiveness, where we release our grip not for them, but for our own peace. In this room, you walk through soft light, seeing memories that were once sharp, now rounded at the edges. You see the friend who didn't show up, but you chose to wish them well. You see the family member whose approval never came, yet you stopped chasing it. You see the stranger who hurt you, unintentionally or not, and you let go of needing an explanation. The grace you gave did not mean you forgot or excused, it meant you chose freedom. You understand now that grace was never about weakness. It was about strength, about choosing peace over pride, healing over holding on. You leave this room quieter inside, carrying no more than what belongs to you. The room of grace you owed yourself. You have given kindness to others, forgiven their faults, understood their mistakes, but to yourself, you've often been less generous. This is the room of grace you owed yourself, where your mind holds the weight of self-judgment, the long list of should-haves, the moments when you needed your own forgiveness and denied it. You've carried guilt like a shadow, guilt for words said in haste, for actions not taken, for opportunities missed. You believed, in some way, that being hard on yourself was a form of discipline, that it kept you accountable, that it made you better, but it only made you tired. Psychologists call this self-criticism bias, where we judge ourselves far more harshly than we would others in the same situation. In this room, the air is heavy with the echoes of blame. Why weren't you stronger, wiser, more careful? You walk past mirrors that reflect not just your image, but the expectations you never met, the standards that were never fair. But here, something softens. You see yourself not as a failure, but as someone learning, someone trying. You recall the times you did your best, even if it didn't look like enough. You see the moments you held on, even when you were falling apart. This room asks not for apologies, but for understanding that you deserve the same grace you give so freely to others. You sit with yourself, not in judgment, but in care. You whisper, I forgive you. And for the first time, you believe it. You leave this room not perfect, but whole. The room of paths you made for others. Not all of your efforts were for yourself. Some of your greatest impact lives in the lives of others, the ones you helped, guided, inspired, even when you didn't realize it. This is the room of paths you made for others, where your mind holds the footprints you left behind, not just in your own journey, but in how you shaped the way for those around you. You did not always know you were leading. You spoke a word, and someone listened. You offered time, and someone found strength. You simply lived your truth, and someone else saw what was possible. Psychologists speak of social modeling, the idea that by being who we are, we give others permission to do the same. In this room, the walls are lined with doors, each one leading to someone else's growth. You open one and see a friend who believed in themselves because you did. Another reveals a stranger who held on one more day because of your kindness. You didn't do these things for recognition, but they mattered. You walked your path, and by doing so, cleared one for others. You see now that the quiet acts, the listening, the support, the honesty were not small. They were seeds. You leave this room humbled, realizing that you have given more than you knew, and the world is better for it. The room of things you will never settle for again. There was a time when you accepted less love, less respect, less joy, because you thought that was all there was. This is the room of things you will never settle for again, where your mind keeps the boundaries drawn from pain, the promises you made to yourself after realizing you deserve more. You remember the moments you stayed silent, when you needed to speak, the times you gave too much, hoping to be seen, the places you remained, long after your spirit had left. Psychologists describe this as value realignment, the process where experience reshapes what we believe we deserve. In this room, the air is clear, the lines sharp. You walk past memories not with regret, but with resolve. You feel the shift, the day you said, no more. No more shrinking. No more waiting. No more hoping someone else would see your worth. You understand now that love does not demand your sacrifice. That peace does not require your silence. That joy is not something to be earned through suffering. You leave this room standing taller, knowing exactly where you end, and the world begins. The room of truths you couldn't say. There are truths that never found their way into the open, not because they weren't real, but because you didn't feel safe enough, strong enough, or ready enough to speak them. This is the room of truths you couldn't say, where your mind holds the thoughts, feelings, and realities you kept hidden, locked within the spaces between words, within glances, within moments of hesitation that stretched into silence. You remember them well, not just what they were, but when they arose, burning at the edge of your throat, desperate to be known. You wanted to tell someone how much you loved them, but the risk of rejection wrapped your heart too tightly. You longed to say that you were hurt, that something broke inside you, but you feared they wouldn't understand, or worse, wouldn't care. There were times when you saw something wrong but stayed quiet, believing your voice wouldn't matter, or that the truth might unravel too much. Psychologists speak of internalized censorship, the deep, conditioned habit of silencing oneself for safety, acceptance, or survival. In this room, you walk past sealed envelopes, each one containing a truth you wished you had voiced. You touch them gently, and they hum with the weight of what could have changed, could have healed, could have opened, if only spoken. Yet, this room does not scold. It understands. It knows that timing is everything, and that sometimes silence is a necessary shield. But now, you feel the difference between the truths that protected you by staying hidden, and the ones that still ache to be free. You stand in this room, not to relive regret, but to honor the strength it took to hold those truths, and perhaps to find courage to speak them now. You leave this room with one truth in your heart, not as a burden, but as a seed ready to be planted in the right soil. The room of love you denied yourself. There were moments when love was near, gentle, waiting, but you turned away. Not because you didn't want it, but because you didn't believe you deserved it. This is the room of love you denied yourself, where your mind holds the times you closed the door to affection, to warmth, fearing that to receive would expose your deepest vulnerabilities. You remember the touches you stepped back from, the compliments you brushed off, the invitations to closeness that made you retreat. You built walls, not because love was unsafe, but because being seen felt dangerous, because letting someone in meant they might see the parts of you you were still trying to hide. Psychologists call this attachment wounding, the fear that love will always come with pain, or that accepting it means losing control. In this room, there are candles that were never lit, letters never opened, embraces imagined but never felt. You realize that the love you denied was not just from others, but from yourself. You withheld comfort, telling yourself you hadn't earned it. You refused rest, thinking productivity was proof of worth. You silenced your needs, believing they were too much. But love was always there, waiting for you to soften. In this room, you see that denying love didn't protect you, it kept you empty. And slowly, you feel the warmth of possibility, that love can enter, that you can receive without losing yourself. You leave this room, not chasing love, but ready to let it find you, as you are. The room of moments you chose yourself. There were times when you stood at the crossroads, torn between pleasing others and honoring yourself, and you chose yourself. This is the room of moments you chose yourself, where your mind holds the memories of courage, of quiet rebellion, of saying yes to your own soul when the world expected you to say yes to them. These were not easy choices. You remember the discomfort, the fear of disappointing, the worry of being alone. But something inside you spoke louder, a knowing, a need. Psychologists speak of self-actualization, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who you are told to be. In this room, there are shoes worn from walking away, from walking toward, from walking alone. You feel the strength it took to leave the relationship that dimmed your light, to turn down the offer that didn't align with your values, to speak your truth even when your voice shook. Choosing yourself was not about selfishness. It was about survival, about integrity. You realized that each of these moments built you, gave you back to yourself. You leave this room standing taller, more whole, more free, knowing you will continue to choose yourself, not against others, but for your own becoming. The room of things that didn't break you. There are storms you didn't think you'd survive, nights that felt endless, weights that seemed unbearable, and yet, here you are. This is the room of things that didn't break you, where your mind holds the trials, the losses, the heartaches that shaped you, but did not destroy you. You walk into this room expecting pain, but you find resilience. You see the time your heart shattered, but you kept breathing. The time everything changed, but you adapted. The time you were alone, but still moved forward. Psychologists describe post-traumatic growth, the strength that emerges not despite suffering, but through it. In this room, there are cracks filled with gold, scars that shine, stories rewritten with courage. You touch the memories, and they no longer hurt, they hum with power. You realize that breaking was never the end. It was the beginning of becoming. You leave this room knowing that while life has bent you, it has also built you into someone unbreakable in spirit. The room of things you were right about. There are moments in life when doubt crept in, when others questioned your choices, your feelings, your truth, and yet, you held on, quietly, patiently, until time revealed that you were right all along. This is the room of things you were right about, where your mind keeps the decisions, the instincts, The deeply rooted knowing that you didn't always have the confidence to defend, but that proved itself through experience. You walk into this room and feel the strange comfort of validation, not from the voices outside, but from the clarity inside you. You remember the time you trusted your gut? Even when no one else saw what you saw, the friend you distanced yourself from who later showed their true colors, the job you turned down that would have drained you, the person you stood by when others walked away, only to find your loyalty well-placed. Psychologists speak of intuitive cognition, the way our minds process and understand information beneath conscious reasoning, often before logic can catch up. This room is filled with the quiet strength of that inner voice, the part of you that noticed, that felt, that knew. You didn't always argue for your truth. You didn't need to. Some things don't require explanation, only patience. You see now that doubt is not always a sign of being wrong. It is often the weight we carry while waiting for life to align with what we already sense. You touch these memories with a kind of pride, but not boastful. This is not about proving others wrong. It's about finally acknowledging that your perception, your decisions, your heart, wisdom, and worth all along. You leave this room not louder, but surer, more rooted in the quiet power of self-trust. The room of things you never finished. There are projects left undone, dreams half-built, conversations without endings, and stories that remain incomplete. Not because you failed, but because life moved, shifted, demanded something else. This is the room of things you never finished, where your mind holds the echoes of beginnings that never found their conclusion. You walk into this room and feel the weight not of failure, but of possibility suspended. The book you started to write, now a few chapters long but full of untold thoughts. The love you gave, but could not grow. The plans you made that stayed on paper while other paths unfolded. Psychologists speak of cognitive closure as the need to complete, to finalize, to wrap loose threads. But here, you see that not everything must be tied up to have value. Some of these unfinished things served their purpose in the starting, in the trying, in the learning. You feel the energy they hold, not as burdens, but as markers of a life lived in motion. You realize that some dreams were stepping stones, not destinations. Some relationships were lessons, not lifetimes. Some ideas came to teach you, not to be realized. In this room, you make peace with the incomplete, knowing that wholeness is not measured by completion, but by experience. You leave with gratitude for what you began, and freedom from needing every story to end. The room of things you will always carry. There are memories, feelings, and truths that do not fade, that you do not outgrow, that shape the core of who you are no matter where life leads. This is the room of things you will always carry, where your mind holds the constants, the loves, the losses, the identities that remain, steady and unchanging, through every season of your life. You walk into this room and feel not heaviness, but depth. These are not weights, they are roots. You remember the person who believed in you when you didn't, and that belief still echoes. You remember the place that felt like home, even if you never returned, and it still warms your thoughts. You remember the moment you knew who you were, and nothing has shaken that knowing. Psychologists describe core memory imprints, events and experiences so meaningful they embed deeply into identity. These are not just memories, they are anchors. In this room, you touch these constants, and they remind you of your essence, the self that has remained, even as the world changed. You realize that while much has come and gone, these few truths have always been with you. Your resilience, your longing for connection, your ability to rise. You leave this room, not burdened, but grounded, carrying what matters, always. The room of joy you created. Joy is not always something we find. Sometimes, it is something we build, moment by moment, choice by choice. This is the room of joy you created, where your mind holds the memories of happiness you didn't wait for, but crafted with intention, with courage, with care. You didn't stumble upon these moments, you made them. You decided to laugh, even on hard days. You reached out, even when it felt safer to stay closed. You noticed the light, even when shadows lingered. Psychologists speak of intentional positivity, the practice of seeking and nurturing joy as an act of resilience. In this room, you walk past snapshots of ordinary days made beautiful by your effort, the meal you cooked to share with a friend, the walk you took to breathe more deeply, the time you chose gratitude over bitterness. These were not grand events. They were small choices, repeated, until joy grew from within. You feel the power of this room, the way joy became not a fleeting feeling, but a state you could return to because you built it. You leave this room smiling, knowing that joy will always be something you can create again. The room of things you regret but understand. There are choices you made that still bring a twinge to your heart. Moments you look back on with a mix of sorrow and clarity, knowing that while you wish they had gone differently, you understand why they unfolded the way they did. This is the room of things you regret but understand, where your mind holds the decisions made from fear, from love, from not knowing better, from doing the best you could at the time. You remember the person you hurt, not because you didn't care, but because you were trying to protect yourself. You recall the path you didn't take, not because it didn't call to you, but because you weren't ready. You see the times you stayed silent, not because you had nothing to say, but because you couldn't find the strength. Psychologists refer to self-compassionate regret, the ability to look at the past with both responsibility and kindness. In this room, the air is thick with memories that sting but no longer wound. You walk among them, feeling their weight, but also their lessons. These were not failures, they were turning points, painful teachers. You sit with one of these memories, let it breathe, let it tell you what it needs to, and you realize that regret does not have to be a prison. It can be a place of growth. You leave this room softer, wiser, carrying both the ache and the acceptance. The room where you chose peace over control. There comes a moment when holding on becomes too heavy, when the need to control everything, to fix, to predict, to make perfect, finally yields to the deeper need for peace. This is the room where you chose peace over control, where your mind holds the times you let go, not because you stopped caring, but because you cared enough to stop clenching. You remember the plans you released, the people you stopped trying to change, the future you stopped trying to script. Psychologists call this surrender acceptance, the act of embracing uncertainty not as defeat, but as a gateway to calm. In this room, the walls breathe. You walk through open space, past doors that once stayed shut because you tried so hard to force them open. You remember the night you exhaled deeply and said, "Enough. Enough trying to make them love you. Enough trying to control what couldn't be. Enough trying to manage every outcome." And in that release, something else arrived, stillness, clarity, a sense of being part of something larger than yourself. This room does not ask for effort. It asks for ease. You leave lighter, trusting that life flows better when you stop fighting the current. The room of words you spoke that set you free. There are words that stayed locked inside you for years, words that waited, gathered strength, and finally broke free, not to wound, but to liberate. This is the room of words you spoke that set you free, where your mind holds the sentences that changed everything, the truth that once spoken could not be taken back and didn't need to be. You remember the day you said, "No more." The moment you said, "I need to leave." The breath you took before whispering, "This is who I am." Psychologists explore the concept of verbal catharsis, the release that comes when truth, long held, is finally voiced. In this room, the air hums with sound. You hear your own voice, said it, reclaiming your space, your power, your right to be. These were not just words. They were keys. They unlocked doors to your next chapter, broke chains of silence, opened hearts, sometimes your own. You touch one of these moments and feel the tremble, the fear, but also the undeniable relief. You realize now that freedom often arrives wrapped in honesty. You leave this room more certain that your voice matters, and that it will continue to lead you forward. The room where you finally belong to yourself. There are times in life when you look for belonging in others, in places, in people, in roles, and then there comes a time when you stop searching outward and come home to yourself. This is the room where you finally belong to yourself, where your mind holds the moment you realize that no external approval, no validation, no group or person could ever give you what your own heart could. You remember the days you shaped yourself to fit, to be liked, to be chosen. You remember the compromises, the losses of self, the quiet ache of being surrounded, yet not seen. Psychologists describe authentic self-acceptance as the moment when external identity falls away, and what remains is truth. In this room, you are alone, but never lonely. You feel your own presence fully, deeply. You realize that belonging was never about being part of them. It was about embracing all of you. You sit here, and in that stillness, you feel enough. You leave this room not needing to prove, but simply to be. The room of everything that made you who you are. There is a place where every fragment of your life, every joy, every sorrow, every success, every failure comes together, not as separate pieces, but as a whole. A being that could only have come into existence through the path you walked. This is the room of everything that made you who you are, where your mind holds the entirety of your becoming, the full landscape of moments that carved, shaped, and softened you. You walk into this room, and it feels both vast and intimate, filled with memories that stretch across time yet all point back to one person. You see the laughter of childhood, the innocence that never fully left you. You feel the weight of losses that you thought would end you, yet here you stand. You remember the faces of those who loved you and those who didn't, each leaving a mark, some scars, some blessings. Psychologists refer to narrative identity, the weaving of your life into a coherent story, where even the hardest parts find meaning. In this room, nothing is wasted. The mistakes you made taught you humility. The risks you took gave you courage. The love you gave, even when it wasn't returned, proved your heart's resilience. You see yourself not as perfect, not as broken, but as whole, because wholeness includes every cracked edge, every unfinished sentence. Every time you stood back up, you run your fingers along the walls of this room, and they are warm, but pulsing with memory. You sit in the center, knowing that this is not a place of judgment. It is a place of truth. All of it mattered. All of it belongs. You leave this room with deep gratitude, carrying not just the best of you, but all of you, finally understanding that who you are is not defined by one moment, but by the sacred sum of it all. The room where you are enough. There is a final room, waiting, simple yet profound, the place where striving ends, where comparison fades, where the long-held belief that you must do more, be more, prove more finally dissolves. This is the room where you are enough, where your mind holds the stillness of self-acceptance, the soft truth that nothing outside of you is required to validate your worth. You step into this room and feel the absence of noise, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You remember all the times you questioned your value, the goals you chased to feel worthy, the people you tried to please, the perfection you pursued to feel like you mattered. Psychologists describe unconditional self-worth, the deep, intrinsic knowing that you are valuable, not because of what you do, but because you are. In this room, there are no mirrors, no scales, no measures, only the quiet presence of being. You sit, and for once, there is nothing to fix, no flaw to obsess over, no future to worry into shape. Just you, breathing, but complete. You realize that you have spent so long waiting to arrive at this feeling, looking for it in achievements, in relationships, in recognition. But it was always here, within. You touch your own hands, feel the pulse in your wrist, the rhythm that has carried you all this time. You are enough, not because of your past, not because of your potential, but because you exist, and existence alone is sacred. You leave this room not changed, but remembered to yourself, to your worth, to the truth that enough is not a goal, but a state of being you can return to.